Hello and welcome to Fiddler's Green, the podcast, the weekly podcast where I discuss culture, politics, and my random thoughts on Twitter conversations. I really have to come up with a better intro for that, but this is what we do here. And so thank you for tuning in. So this week I have had a real hard time coming up with a topic. So I decided instead to just complain about random dialectics that are going on in the Twitter sphere, in the online spaces, and in the Substack areas, the place where real intellectual conversations are going. And so I compiled a bunch of them to complain to you about. And I kind of realized that they all had kind of one continuous theme, one kind of theme that captures everything that's going on in our culture currently. And I think that we really desperately need to escape. We truly do live in the age of fake and cope. It's ubiquitous. It runs through everything. Every single thing that goes on in our culture is just designed to help people get over the fact that the old world, the old sense of meaning is dead, and they have to exist and find meaning in a new one. And no one actually wants to take these steps. And not only that, I feel that my entire millennial generation is just caught in this. It's not even our own cope. It's this boomer cope, this boomer inability to kind of engage with the world as it is post the internet, post 9/11, post the collapse of the industrial American economy and the financialization of the first world. It's so odd, and I wanted to just kind of confront this and trace this theme throughout a variety of conversations tonight, and then we could talk a little bit about this. Cope is something that I don't know if I've ever had a podcast explicitly about cope, but people will know the emotion a lot, especially if you've gone through the internet and you pay attention to, in particular, left-wing channels on the internet. Anytime post 2021. Their favorite word was cope. They loved talking about how the right wing was on copium. They couldn't get enough of it. In fact, one of the more popular Twitter accounts to emerge during this time was a right wing cope. And I knew about it even though I wasn't on Twitter at that time. I had seen it come up so much on sort of the left-wing social media spheres, even the alternative ones. This is kind of like a staple. This was their stone toss. It was to tweet about some kind of random boomer who still thought Trump was president, or who still thought we were going to win it all in the end. I mean, if you think of the kind of messaging you get out to someone like Steve Turley, and the progressives were just lapping this up. They couldn't get enough of it. And we don't really. The thing is we don't really talk about what it means to cope, what it really, why is cope such a problem for the age? Why is it associated with the right? Why is it so associated with the right wing? And how can you kind of, people can sort of feel it even though they can't explain it. And so I'm thinking back to sort of a story now to kind of set the stage of this stuff. As someone who kind of comes from a progressive background and a Californian progressive background, the thing I always think back to is, I was in Berkeley back in the day in the early 2000s, so I saw a lot of these trends emerge before they really became prominent in the culture as we know it today. And I always think back to the advent of polygamy or poly. Now, this is something that everyone knows by now, the polycule, the ugly polycule. But it was something that was exclusively kind of a thing in the Bay Area of California in the 2000s. And people didn't call it polycules back then. They just called it poly. And, obviously, I wasn't for that scene of progressive people. I was kind of I wasn't really an incel, but I was kind of a down on my luck, 20-something person. I wasn't a big ladies' man, and so I wasn't hip with all this stuff. But I had a bunch of friends who were way more sexually adventurous, who did all this stuff. And I remember kind of sitting with them, and obviously, you're in college, you're drinking, you're talking about various weird stories that happened to you. For you Zoomers out there, people actually used to do this in real life and not on Discord servers. This was a thing that Xers and millennials did, and there's this sort of pattern I noticed about a lot of these people who are in these poly relationships, and this is sort of the first indication that the sexual revolution was not as it was advertised, because of course, even back then in the Bay Area, gay was cool, alternative sexualities were cool, breaking from the missionary sex position truth regime was cool. And so people always emphasize that aspect of their personalities. And without a doubt, every time you heard one of these people who's really into the polygamous scene, they would always come out with this sort of like Nietzschean kind of I've transcended monogamy type spiel. I mean, I'm sure you guys know about this now. Like, oh man, like you're jealous. Are you so insecure that you couldn't stand to have your partner sleep with another guy? Are you so insecure that you couldn't just be open to something new and have I'm not as ruled by jealousy as you are. I've overcome that, and that's always the line. And I'm liberated. I've taken the next step. And you guys are into this whole monogamy thing, this jealously guarding your partners. This is retrograde. This is you not being emotionally as strong as I am. This is you kind of being tampered down by the Judeo-Christian, when people use that term back then, this Judeo-Christian worldview that makes you have to covetously guard your partner. And you're like, okay, cool. That's awesome. Maybe I hope one day I can overcome my jealousy and have my girlfriend sleep with somebody else. That sounds like a great deal. And, and I mean, sincerely back then, you kind of think that to yourself, but then, you meet up with the same guys, and you kind of get this image, this quick view into, beyond the sort of the Nietzschean propaganda, beyond the Dan Savage front page of how all of this non-monogamous stuff is supposed to work. As you get to know these people, you get kind of these little, keyhole views into their lives and to what it actually means to be in a polycule. And it's just the most squalid shit ever. No amount of Nietzschean posing about how this stuff could work is kind of is going to cover up how it actually does work. And it always comes to when people describe their daily routines. That's when it comes down to it, because because this is Silicon Valley, because this is the Bay Area, because this is shitlib California, everything has to be meritocratic. So what happened back in these days is a lot of these polycules, they had these ranking systems, like your primary or your tertiary, right? And not only that, they were extremely, they developed this route where they became highly matriarchal too, or at least the ones that, that my guy friends fell into kind of squalidly. And so you always hear these stories, and again, this is something anyone here probably will recognize, this dynamic from shows like You Can't Stop Progress, or the kind of cringe variety polycules you see on TikTok all the time. These kind of like these dead-eyed guys who are kind of put into the back room while their wife sleeps with another man, and they kind of convince themselves that they're doing this for the greater good of her, or for feminism. But back in the day, it wasn't even for feminism, because that was sort of, feminism was kind of in a downswing at that point. And what you really were doing it for was to show that you're just like this new age up and coming tech bro who's not whose Nietzschean horizons are not constrained by these petty notions of monogamy. And then you go home and you spend the rest of your evening, preparing a picnic so your wife can, go out with like a new boyfriend that she just met. And that's your job for the evening. When I'm going back and, playing Call of Duty or Halo or whatever, you're preparing for your wife's date. That's your chore. And it's all these little things too. Like, you have restrictions on exactly what you can do and say and act around other women, but she doesn't. And this would kind of come up that there are these sort of one-sided restrictions. And you're okay. Well, hold on. hold on, Mr. Evolin Nietzschean Superman who's gotten behind jealousy. How come, you're behind, you've gotten beyond jealousy, but have you forgotten how to negotiate a deal? How come she could have all these side dates and you're stuck behind with just her preparing her tacos for her and Javier at Half Moon Bay tomorrow. I think I might be stealing a few of those things from a Can't Stop Progress episode or whatever. But then it's a very similar kind of deal. It kind of betrays that this is what the front page narrative on this thing isn't actually what's going on. And sure enough, there'd always be these little hints, and there'd be this one moment where they would drop the bomb that indeed they were literally like being led around on a leash by the other people in a relationship. Their girlfriend or their wife at some point didn't want to be married to them or date them anymore. And this whole polygamy thing was essentially a put on so that they could save face and still be in the relationship, because they were so sort of broken up by the prospect of leaving this girl or being left by this girl that they had to maintain their relationship at all costs. And so they came up with this Nietzschean front post hoc. And I should say, this was not something that was just guys. I knew a girl who's, her sort of alpha Chad boyfriend was cheating on her with a different girl every week. She knew about it, but she convinced herself it was a poly relationship. And she had some kind of system where, like, I don't know, he'd buy her ice cream every time he cheated or something like that. And this is like, and of course she convinced herself, oh, well, this is me being feminist. This is me being cosmopolitan. No, this is you being not even a sister wife, but being a tertiary hausfrau for this guy that has a different girl in every port, and this Nietzschean feminist Judith Butler pose about how your polymorphous perversities are liberating you from monogamy are just the excuse for you to chain yourself to this utterly degrading situation. And it's cope. The cope moment was what you're waiting for in all of these polygamous stories. They always began with the guy being a Nietzschean Superman, and they always ended with the guy preparing tacos for their wife's date with Javier at Half Moon Bay the next day. That's how all of the stories started and how all of them ended. And this really gave me a very conscious understanding of what cope was. To the left wing, cope is simply right-wingers losing and not wanting to lose. And that's not exactly what cope is. Cope is something much more specific. Cope is when you are in a painful situation and you have a choice between acknowledging the painful situation, coming to terms with it, and reaching for the greater good, or instead holding out some kind of transparently false fantasy with the hope that the pain will go away by itself. And so what you're essentially doing is just medicating yourself with lies. You're medicating yourself with fakeness, you're medicating yourself with lies, and in the process, you lose your own authenticity. And this is something that the right wing is... I don't exactly know, and I know I complain about this all the time. I don't know exactly why we keep on falling into this. I know why, and we'll go through it on this podcast. We'll keep on falling into this trap. But the left is not wrong when they see the right wingers as sort of being the copers. And let's make sure that this slideshow is working. Okay, so Linux has not betrayed me, and the slideshow is indeed working. This kind of brings me to the first aggravating conversation that we had this week in the right-wing sphere. Twitter and Telegram and Substack were all abuzz with this conversation. So as everyone knows the Babylon Bee, everyone knows and loves the Babylon Bee. I certainly do. I remember back in 2012, and I know this sounds kind of pretentious. Everyone does this with Silicon Valley companies, but everyone was saying how back in 2012, and every year since, my friends would say, my non-left-wing friends obviously, would say, man, it's too bad we don't have a right-wing Onion, because all of these articles are just ripe for satire. And there's nobody there to just do it. And it would take a lot of work, but it would be brilliant. And then I think around 2015, a few people tried it. Babylon Bee was one. In the sort of Catholic sphere, I remember a more prominent one being Eye of the Tiber, which was actually I think it was older than Babylon Bee, and it was Catholic. And unfortunately, Eye of the Tiber had sort of a political identity crisis when Trump was elected. And it sort of just digressed into sort of boomer jokes about being Catholic, which wasn't what people wanted. What people wanted what was an awareness of clown world and an ability to kind of make fun of it from a non-left-wing point of view. And so, but Babylon Bee, the Protestant version of Eye of the Tiger, was willing, ready, and able to fill this niche that everyone knew was there. The Onion could no longer be funny because it was obviously just an establishment rag that would make fun of whatever how many jokes about Barron Trump do you want to see in any given episode? Or about Russian collusion that is false? I mean, is the joke on you after all of this? So everyone knew there was this niche. Everyone knew that this was low-hanging fruit. And the Babylon Bee, they were the people there to take that. And it had some genuinely really great ones, and they were helped out by the fact that the mainstream press totally overreacted to their popularity. So, the famous one was Snopes that came after them. Well, they're obviously a fake news website like The Onion, and it kept on fact-checking them as if what was obviously satire was like some kind of Russian misinformation campaign. I think the famous one was CNN purchases industrial strength washers to do a spin cycle on the news. I mean, yeah, that's misinformation. That's not satire. You can't transparently see through this. You can't see that this is a joke. And obviously nobody who reads the Babylon Bee is reading this stuff as, maybe someone every now and again, some really gullible person would read The Onion as not a joke. And that would be a part of the fun of The Onion. And every now and again, a person would not get the joke of the Babylon Bee, and that would be the fun of that too. And progressives' inability to see this and their histrionic reaction, trying to get them canceled and deplatformed for misinformation, it was just hilarious. It made the jokes even better. And it always kind of was a tug of war with the Babylon Bee, because that came obviously from this red state. I don't want to say evangelical culture, but I guess it was an evangelical culture. It was a culture that had a very difficult time with irony. The whole point in The Onion was to kind of understate things. And Babylon Bee, oftentimes, they had this problem where they needed to go right up to the joke and just point it right at the nose, which destroys the humor. It kind of insults the intelligence of your audience. And it ruins the joke. It's like it's inviting you to be a laugh line for this comedy property, and you could kind of see them getting better. You could kind of see them improving their shtick, getting stronger, knowing how to kind of sit back and let the ridiculousness of clown world tell their own jokes and kind of repost off of that, rather than coming out with their editorial opinion and trying to insert a laugh line behind it. But you could tell very slowly that the Babylon Bee was having sort of a political identity crisis. And this was what did sort of the Eye of the Tiger in, which was, again, a much less popular, much earlier version of the Babylon Bee for Catholics. And that was that, and this very much follows along one of the themes from the previous podcast about the year the internet stopped laughing. At some point, the implications of all of these horrible things start becoming grim. And you have to ask yourself, okay, like we're laughing, but is the joke on us? Is this gallows humor? Are we going to win, guys, at the end? I mean, unfortunately, I think the conclusion is it has to be that it's a little of gallows humor. But that's absolutely not within the brand of conservatism. That's not within the brand of the Babylon Bee. And so as sort of 2021 turned into 2022, and now turning into 2023, the Babylon Bee had an identity crisis because it could not make its readership feel secure while it was laughing. There was this, again, as Morgoth said, the year 2022 was the year the internet stopped laughing. Shit became serious. People were already dying of all this COVID stuff. But the implications of our government's mistakes became more gruesome and more gruesome. Until you can't really describe the news without describing a fiasco that has cost, thousands of people their lives in terms of mismanagement by our government, and so you could tell that the Babylon Bee could not talk their way around the ideological problems that were brought to them. And you would have this, and this is sort of the process of Cope. You can kind of see it going on in real time. So Joel Berry is one of the editors at the Babylon Bee. And a few weeks ago, or I think it was actually just a week ago, he had some kind of fight with people about assimilation. You could tell he had a fight with somebody on the distant right, who probably rightfully pointed out a few choice hard truths about how the fundamental nature of the American project is probably doomed, and certainly the fundamental nature of America's post-civil rights project is absolutely doomed, because the implications of everything going on in the news is nothing is going to get better, and these systems are going to continue to degrade until they absolutely fall apart. And moreover, the conservative pretension that if only we had some kind of base leader in charge, so we could turn the ship around. If only we had a Republican who could point out that the Dems were the real racists, and racial harmony was just applying enough Ronald Reagan to California, everything would turn around and we would be back on the road to Martin Luther King Jr. land and blah, 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 blah. I can't help but speculate that Joel Berry's sudden turn came from literally the sort of reaction from Martin Luther King weekend. So I think that was a week ago too, where, and this happens more and more every year, is that the neoconservative project and the conservative project post-Reagan really took on board Martin Luther King as a modern day saint, and implicitly endorsed the project of civil rights, even though it went against several of their core principles and had a number of implications that directly went against the interests of their base and were manifestly not working in the present world. Moreover, the image of Martin Luther King, which was always the icon conservatives loved to embrace, was, to put it gently, he was an extremely whitewashed character. He had a number of very big moral failings that never get mentioned. He had a number of questionable radical political affiliations, which the left constantly exploited. Your evangelical son and daughter get brought up on the diet of Martin Luther King in high school, and then they learn that he was highly sympathetic to communism in college. And that's where they learn this lesson, and they learn it from communists and socialists. And what do you think their reaction is going to be? Right, it's all these little kind of hidden, and also the things like he didn't even write his famous speeches. That's oftentimes not known. There was a very famous American socialist who was the writer behind most of Dr. Martin Luther King's famous speeches, and I use the doctor loosely if you know the other scandals associated with this character. So he's not the hero he was made out to be. So every year when the Martin Luther King holiday comes around, the conservative spirit gets more and more aware of how they're being conned by this civil right narrative. And so the people who are kind of on the more classic conservative Generation X normicon bandwagon, they feel their worldview kind of slipping away. And so what happens is, I think what happens is they look down and they realize that everything that they've kind of relied on as sort of the solid fixture of American identity is going to crumble away instantly the second this apparatus of the progressive truth regime goes away. And they feel the immediate need to shore up and create a constituency around a moderate progressive position. And this results in counter-signaling hard, the distant right. And I kind of liken this to the moment, in these based Nietzschean polygamous people, where they realize that their significant other no longer loves them and wants out of the relationship. And their sort of polycule is their attempt to create a moderate position between being this person's mate or partner and breaking up with them. And it's just the land of Cope through and through and through and through and through. Okay, so sure enough, Joel Berry, after the Martin Luther King Day holiday, starts to to counter signal the right here, left, right, and sideways. I don't think anyone can read that tiny text. I'll go through it. The first tweet he gives is saying, well, we should have open borders and just assimilate all the immigrants into good old-fashioned red state American values, Christianity and the American flag. And he just gets dunked on by this. I mean, can the guy not do math? Can the guy not see demographic trends for the last 40 years when we had a non-open but just loose immigration policy? What is this guy thinking? Moreover, I mean, I posted this on his initial tweet. Why does Red America think it's so great at assimilating new immigrants into itself? Like, where has Red America gotten this idea that they're just gangbusters at assimilating people? Red America, aka the rural portion of this country, has not assimilated people since the beginning of the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned. The last population that they assimilated were the post-World War I German migrants. After that, the assimilation has all gone on in blue areas. The Irish and the Eastern European immigrants and the Italians, these were also Democratic voters, and they only split off from the Democratic coalition post-civil rights, and really post some of the, what I call the hard civil rights rules, like busing and affirmative action in the 70s. Not so much the initial Martin Luther King stuff, although, there's a lot of problematic stuff to go around in all phases of this revolution. But the assimilation of these cultures into the mainstay of quote-unquote white culture was accomplished by Blue America, because assimilation is accomplished by educational institutions, specifically government-supported educational institutions, and specifically, and more importantly, institutions of higher education. Because cultural tropes flow from the high class to the low class, just like baby names. They go from the high class to the low class. So if you control the highest education, you will control the flow of cultural assimilation. And Red America doesn't. But of course, in classic Cope fashion, this initial attempt to create a moderate position fails, and he gets dogpiled. So immediately, what does Joel Berry do? Well, I mean, he goes straight on and tries to trigger the gripers, because he assumes that everyone who's talking about how this plan of open immigration combined with red state and mass assimilation is bonkers. He immediately associates all those people with just gripers, because Nick Fuentes is the guy that normie cons are allowed to hate. I'm not a big Nick Fuentes fan myself, but if you're on the normie-con side, he's your big troll villain, and so everyone who disagrees with him now is a groiper, and he starts doubling down on, oh wow, we should make interracial marriage mandatory. We should breed out all races in this country so that they're a nice common shade of brown, and that will eliminate all the racial divisions. And then of course he gets the obvious follow-up. And people say, oh, hey man, so you want to melt down all nations and all races into one? I wonder, why do you support Israel? do you support? I mean, you're not saying you don't support Israel, right? And of course, Joel Berry, like the neocon he is, I mean, if he was smart, he would have walked into the joke and just been like, oh no, everyone just needs to go into the cultural blender. So it would be unclear whether he was joking or not. But of course, he does the typical thing that copers do, which is he kind of combines the fakeness of the joke with a real opinion, and you can see kind of how he's the butt of this joke, and he's, oh no, I support Israel, I love Zion, I make special exception for God's chosen people. And then he goes on, he says, Jews have the right to exist. They have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to defend the borders of their country. As soon as Joel Berry says that, I've come to the Cope moment of this dialogue tree. This is the point where the Nietzschean subverter of monogamy admits that he's making a taco picnic for his wife to date Javier at Half Moon Bay the next day. That's what I've just heard. He's so he's very, very concerned about somebody else's race and people being preserved in its holistic quality, in its historical properties. and he can't even find that ethic in it for his own interests. This is Cope. This is Cope through and through. And I don't know. I guess this is better than admitting to the world that you've lost. Admitting to the world that yes, you did have a people, you did have a unique culture, and you were totally deracinated by a promise of American culture and a promise of, I hate the word capitalistic, but capitalistic market wealth or American affluence, and then you basically gave it up. You allowed yourself to be deracinated. And now that everything's being taken from you because you're a deracinated individual, you don't have a leg to stand on. And now you're here hoping that somebody who's essentially cuckolding you is having a good time with your former partner. Because let's be honest, it's your former partner. Now, I really hope the American government has a great day with Israel while your native Californian Anglo culture is obliterated and wiped off the face of the map for all history, to be replaced by a culture that you can't even recognize, to be ruled over by an establishment government that you can't control, to be used as the scapegoat for all of the nation's sins, including slavery, even though slavery wasn't legal in California. That's the role you're playing. But it's preferable because the acknowledgement of reality is too painful. The acknowledgement of reality is you've already lost. It's time to move away from this relationship. Your wife has already left you. It's time to find out what dignity is on the opposite end of this loss, rather than continuously put up this pantomime and become a Potemkin person. I feel like this is the role that's been led out. I mean, this person here, I think Joel Berry's a Gen Xer, or he's a very old millennial, like myself. But this is the weird thing about this whole thing is it's not even, it's not like we got ourselves into this mess and now we're coping because we have a sunk cost fallacy. This is a problem with the previous generation got us into this mess, and the previous generation doesn't want to admit that its prescriptions for the future were totally futile, and now it's essentially saying, okay, well, hello millennials, your role for your entire lives is going to be to dance around like fake people and try to pretend like this broken society is still real and that you're still stakeholders in it, and it will never pay out. But if you pretend like you're stakeholders, then the dawning realization that you're not stakeholders and that you're actually dispossessed people, you won't have to deal with that for a little bit longer. So keep on doing this dance. Keep on doing this little fake dance. And I know, since I have a lot of conversations to get through, I'll go on to the next one. The next bottle of copium we have in the cupboard is Steven Pinker. I'm not even so sure that this is copium at this point, because I'm pretty sure Steven Pinker is just a bad actor at this stage. I don't know how to explain Steven Pinker's mind without thinking of him as some kind of con artist. He is a very intelligent con artist, but his whole shtick, from him coming on the scene in the early 2000s after the Language Instinct with his seminal book, The Blank Slate, his whole shtick was that he was the new atheist, technocratic shitlib that got why political correctness and wokeness, I mean, we didn't call it wokeness back then, but he got why political correctness and far left activism was wrong and dangerous and not truth-telling. And he was going to set us all straight. Man, it's been a hard 20 years, Steve. It's been hard. It's really been, I mean, you've been doing a bang-up job. I mean, you're one of the most senior people at Harvard. You're one of the most famous public intellectuals we have at America's most prestigious university. And for a large part of your time at that prestigious university, you had a university chancellor, Larry Summers, who was similarly not politically correct. And you had 23 years to get the academy in line. Well, what did you do with that? What genius plans did you come up with? Well, essentially nothing. Essentially, he came up with a website called Heterodox Academy, which was essentially, well, we're going to create a forum for academics who are already credentialed through the ordinary academic system, who are already published through the ordinary academic system, who are already respected as academics in their field. We're going to create a forum for them to talk amongst themselves and to potentially organize grants. And we're going to police this forum for basically not being too edgy, for not going off the reservations in terms of ideology. We don't want this space polluted by ideology, after all. And of course, what would happen? Well, the problem with this whole heterodox academy thing is that prestige in this heterodox academy was entirely controlled by appointment to university and publication in journals, the same way prestige is handled in the ordinary academy. So all of their new talent would have to be filtered through the same ideological filter that was essentially turning the universities, the ordinary universities, into an ideological monoculture. So all Steven Pinker did was create a similar problem, offset a little bit in time. And everyone could see this. Once the prestige system is the exact same mechanism as the prestige system of the old order, it feeds from the same source of talent. And so all of the people who didn't want to go through grad school, who were bright, upcoming people, and couldn't find an advisor, would never get to Heterodox Academy. All of the scholars who couldn't get published because their research results weren't in the political persuasion of the journals in question, they would never get to Heterodox Academy. All the people that couldn't get tenure or couldn't get even an academic position would never be in Heterodox Academy, because the mode of establishing yourself as a scholar was the mode of the cathedral. And of course, what does Pinker do? Well, he goes around wringing his hands over PC wokeness, claiming how, oh my God, it's so bad that all of the stuff has taken over the academy, just like Richard Hanania. And then he politically bashes right-wingers. He helps Democrats solidify their control over government. He comes up with excuses to support the educational bureaucracy, and then he whistles past the graveyard where better scholars than him are being defrocked for saying the exact same things that he said in the blank slate. And meanwhile, Christopher Rufo is his name, and Ron DeSantis, they, for the first time, tried to start a conservative public university in Florida, or one that gets public funding. And of course, Steven Pinker piles on. Oh my God, ideological education, ideological capture. Oh, the right-wingers are the real fascists. They're trying to create some kind of university where scholarship won't be free, where you have to have right-wing ideas even to get published. Stephen, that's your university. That's Harvard. That's every single place in existence. I've applied for many. I've held academic positions very briefly. I've taught. I've applied to them. I've interviewed. In front of every interview for a professorship or an assistant professorship or a lecturer position in a major university, they require you to fill out a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, a DEI statement, communicating how you intend to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion inside the campus. And saying, I don't think diversity or equity are goals of the university is not an acceptable answer. So everyone has to come up with some kind of bullshit reason to profess their allegiance to the ideology of the university. And believe me, that bounces a lot of people. It bounced me away from wanting to get a job at the university. Because anybody who's bullshitting it is going to sound a lot less realistic than the people who are actually programmed by this ideology. I have no time for this. I mean, I don't think that Christopher Rufo has such a great idea, too. I was listening to him and Ron DeSantis on their whole academic project in Florida. And I don't know why we don't get that. I mean, I know there's a few people in the Old Glory Club that seem like they don't understand this principle either. When you're in political power as a dissident, you don't want to go around issuing orders. Like, your objective should not be issuing orders to the existing bureaucracy to start enforcing the law. So, my friend Raging Mandrel did a piece at the Old Glory Club about how Republicans could essentially use the debt ceiling to extort Democrats into doing what they wanted. I think this is wrong. This is overstated, because Republicans have always played these sort of games of chicken with the debt, and they never win them against the Democrats because the Democrats win both. They win both coming and going, as Curtis Yarvin used to say. They win if the Republicans hold the line, and they win if the Republicans cave. But I think more telling than that was in Raging Mandrel's points, the things he wanted to get. They were all things like get rid of affirmative action, enforce the border, deport illegal immigrants, get rid of CRT, reform the universities. These policies can't be done. You cannot command the universities to illegalize CRT. You cannot command the universities to get rid of affirmative action. You cannot command the federal bureaucracy to start enforcing immigration. You know why? Because federal bureaucracy is like 95% to 99% Democrat. They are the cathedral. And so they will say, oh, yes, we'll do it. And they'll drag their heels every step of the way. And what's worse than that is that while they're dragging their heels, while they're saying, yes, we'll enforce this law and never enforce it, the Democrats can say, oh, look, we gave you this concession. We gave you the promise that we'll deport all illegal immigrants. We gave you the promise that we'll get rid of affirmative action. We gave you the promise that we'll legalize CRT, knowing full well that these promises will never be kept. If you want to get a concession out of government as a distant, the government that concession has to be money in the hand, power in an institution that's not controlled by them, or just straight up firing people out of existing institutions and replacing them with loyalists. If you're not putting bills in your hand and putting pink slips in their hand, immediately after the conclusion of any deal with the cathedral, you have not measurably moved power in the system at all. All you're exchanging is power for promises, and promises made by a bureaucracy that's not controlled by you and has no desire to maintain faith with either the Constitution or with the opposing party are worth absolutely nothing. I mean, so, Rufo. Okay, Rufo, I guess he's misguided. But at least, with this new university, he's thinking in somewhat the same direction. He's thinking, how can we cordon off our own funding, our own territory of money that belongs to us, and use that for our allies? And that's a step forward, even though his attempt to ban CRT in institutions that are controlled by people who believe in CRT are completely useless. At least some of the alternative projects are taking shape. And, Steven Pinker, what do you say about him? He's kind of the person that wants to maintain this cope continuously. I guess because he benefits from it. I guess because he's going to be the guy who's the anti-PC guy while the university system goes on. And, he's very intelligent. He'll write a lot of interesting papers. There won't be anyone who follows him because there can't be, because nobody's going to get to that prestigious a level having the opinions that Steven Pinker does ever again. And the Heterodox Academy is certainly not going to promote that person, although I'm sure Richard Hanania sees himself as very much the successor to Steven Pinker. But it's ultimately worth nothing. It's ultimately worth just sawdust. But what's sort of funny about this, and is that by the end of the week, even after all of this cringe stuff, it kind of got measurably worse, I guess, because I came across sort of like the third fight we had, which is the Yarvin versus McManus fight. Now, Yarvin's back, and he's sort of responding to critics, and sociologically analyzing progressivism is Yarvin's strong suit. He, like myself, is a blue stater born and raised in kind of the same area of the country, and certainly with a lot of the same, although he was a foreign diplomat brat, right? So he wasn't raised in California, but he has some connection to Northern California, I've been told. I think he still lives there. Maybe he lived there at one point when he was writing UR back in the day. And his real strength is kind of describing the progressive mind in unflattering detail. And every now and again these sort of humorous fights emerge, and the two ones that came up this week were Damon Linker and Matt McManus. Now, Damon Linker is this kind of extremely cringe normicon, a sort of David French, but without the prominence or popularity of David French. He is this person that was formerly part of the Republican establishment that during the Bush administration went full Daily Show and started just screaming his head off about how evangelicals were about to establish the Republic of Gideon or whatever from Handmaid's Tale. And they were all imminently going to be clasped in chains of an emergent evangelical mega crusade that would invade the continental United States and plow under it all forms of secular liberal democracy. Well, David Linker is still out there, and he writes a column literally called Eyes on the Right. And, he had a takedown of Yarvin, which was, hilariously bad. And it's kind of sad because Damon Linker is such a fake person. His only way of answering it is to say like, oh, well, dissent is what I do, Curtis. So the fact that I'm in my position and dissenting means that the system is working. Damon Linker doesn't dissent against the system. He spent more time supporting the progressive worldview than he has detracting from it in any way, shape, or form. As Yarvin pointed out, he writes a blog called Eyes on the Right. As Yarvin points out, implying he's some kind of informant on the right. This is a joke. But what's even more funny is the sort of interaction with Matt McManus. He's again one of these bread tube figures like Ben Burgess. I think that he's an associated act with Ben Burgess. And I know Matt McManus. I've had him on the show back in 2020. And, I'm not going to lie, this person is, I have, as a person, I recognize that I have an enormous amount of self-hatred for my own caste in my own class. I hate my own class. I hate my own caste of academics and teachers. I think the entire thing needs to be destroyed. And, I want to bring fire and destruction upon the specific group of people that produced me. As traitorous as that sounds, it's kind of my MO for being here. Is that I think that this environment is just ideologically poisoned through and through. It's completely lost touch with truth and vitality, and it's recycling these stale points over and over again. And McManus is he's the representation of that. And how I said that there is these I had to write these essays describing how I was a good progressive that would work tirelessly to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion as a professor in an engineering program in a field that had nothing to do with ideology. Yet I had to write these essays over and over and over again, claiming that I had all these progressive ideals, and yes, I would be the handmaiden of everything that the Democrats wanted, if only they let me teach for an incredibly small amount of money at these universities. And so I always think that in this moment when I wrote these essays, I had to kind of pretend to be this Potemkin person, this fake individual. But imagine that for a moment, this fake individual I was pretending to be came to life and could walk around this room and interact with this world and actually have opinions and spew them. That fake person would be Professor Matt McManus. He is the diversity, equity, and inclusion statement professor, somehow formed out of the dust on the ground and breathed life by the university system. He has every single, he has, oh my God, he's a socialist, but he doesn't like any of that scary revolutionary stuff. He wants the Nordic model. Oh, well, the Nordic model isn't socialism. Well, okay, but it kind of is socialism. It's an adjacent project. So, he can be a socialist without ever challenging the existing institutions or the existing financial apparatus of this country. So he's a status quo socialist. And of course, he's deeply, deeply, deeply moral. But no, not in an old-fashioned way. He's pro-moral, but anti-teleology. Because teleology is what all those old bad principles were. And being a moral Christian in the mode of Dr. Martin Luther King, that's the good morality, that's social justice, that's everything that we want to support. I'm unaware of any meaningful way you can be somebody who incorporates tightly moral propositions without being into your analysis, without being teleological. If you say that history has a moral side to it, history is, it's an actual physical material thing. The past is, or at least with our understanding of physics, the past actually exists, right? Or all of our sciences is kaput, right? And by saying that the history has a moral structure to it, you are literally, projecting a teleological component on to this material object. But no, it's not teleological. Okay. God, you had me fooled, Professor. You had me fooled about that, because I'm reading his response to Curtis Yarvin, and it's kind of delightful. There's no contestation of fact. At one point, though, and this is Curtis sort of points this out in his rebuttal. He's describing the Haitian Revolution, and when he's factually describing what happened in the Haitian Revolution, he can't help but integrate moral prescriptions into his description of the events. Like, this was the heroic character that liberated the Haitians from the oppressive French, and so like you have what's supposedly a statement of fact, and there's like 3 moral prescriptions inside of it, and there literally is a contention of fact. And so, at the risk of kind of violating privacy, I had a conversation with McManus about this, and I said to him, like, Curtis Yarvin lays out some challenges to McManus. He says, primary sources. I have primary sources demonstrating all of my claims I made about history. Do you think you could read these primary sources and tell me why they're wrong? That's a challenge to you, says Professor McManus. This is your homework. You're not going to do this, but I challenge you to read these primary sources about the Haitian Revolution, about the history of slavery, about the history of the American Revolution and democracy in this country, and the history of communism and its relationship to our ruling class, and what actually happened on Woodrow Wilson's expedition to destroy the Bolshevik menace. I challenge you to read all of these sources, the primary sources that are written by or by biographers who lived contemporaneously to these events, and then tell me why these firsthand accounts should be ignored or outweighed by other firsthand primary sources. I say I want to see McManus's answer. McManus gets angry at me because he says I'm pestering him. I don't know. Was McManus pestering Molbug when he made his response to him? Well, whatever. I want to see these sources. I want to see what your answer is. And of course, McManus is saying, oh, Yarvin's lazy. Yarvin's lazy. He's lazy. He's not academic. He's all throughout Twitter. After he wrote this article, McManus was all about personal attacks. Yarvin's evil. He's lazy. He's a dangerous thinker. He's immoral. And he communicates all sorts of moral contempt, individualized and personalized, which he directs at Yarvin. And it gets down to sort of a question of fact. It gets down to a question of primary sources, which Yarvin gives. And after a day of calling Yarvin lazy, I asked McManus, okay, like, why don't you show me the money? Why don't you actually give me what your take is in a way that would refute these primary sources? And he says, well, no, it's not worth my time. It's boring to argue with Curtis Yarvin. And he's like, the reason why it's boring to argue with Curtis Yarvin is that Curtis Yarvin's not academically serious. And so I said to well, pretend that whoever you thought was academically serious brought the same arguments Yarvin did against you, Matt. What would you say to that? How would you answer this if someone you respected, and who do you respect on the right? And you list a bunch of dead people. Well, that's great. Dead people can't bring active questions to esteemed university professors like Dr. McManus. Okay. And so I try to get a sense of like what his actual argument is. And all I get is these pages of moralization about how Yarvin is a bad person and about how all ideologies that are non-egalitarian are evil. Historically speaking, it's this Manichaean millennial and how we need to imminently institute equality in this country by following the Nordic model of socialism. Again, not saying to understand that the Nordic countries aren't socialists, but whatever. Who cares about words meaning things? Who cares about primary sources? Because that's how academics do things. They don't use primary sources to refute claims. They just assume that their political prescriptions are right, and then they hold a seance. They read the bones, they read the tea leaves, and in their little academic chambers, obscured from the gaze of all us unwashed masses, they come to conclusions about history that don't require actual reference to primary sources because they're academics. So we have an academic, we have basically a mystery cult of millenarian moralism, but it's academic. But we're trying to find, and it's deeply connected to Christianity, deeply. Does Matt McManus practice Catholicism? No. Somehow, everyone that writes about Matt McManus seems to think that he's Catholic, because he uses the moniker Catholic for himself a lot. But he's certainly not Catholic by his own admission. What is his religion other than politics? And you'll never see that, because there is no religion other than politics. This is a religion that exists completely for the purpose of cope, completely for the purpose of carrying on a political worldview. And it's so sad. It's so hollow. People on the right, I had this big war with the Volans and the pagans this year, because I hate this aspect where religion, where I have to confront a religion that's not being practiced. I mean, okay, like I appreciate the fact that you have these spiritual inclinations, and that you want me to respect that they're deeply felt. But once you're putting across theological propositions to attack my own, then what? Then it's not an inappropriate question for me to ask if you actually practice this religion, or if it's just being used as a tendentious argument to make it seem like you're actually grounded in something more firm than just a desire to sound exactly like the professor that a diversity, equity, and inclusion prompt encourages you to be like. And what's so funny about this is that there's no... What's so funny about all of this is Matt McManus obviously wants to be a professor. There's no room for people like him in the academy anymore. There's nothing for him to do. Like, he can attack people like Yarvin. He can attack people like me and call us immoral and call us anti-Christian because we don't believe that equality is something that can be realized and implemented by human means in this life, or ever, if you don't believe in the second coming. But what's waiting behind this task? Is there some kind of explanation? Is there some kind of engagement with the problems that we're experiencing right now? This Nordic model we've been trying to put together for years and years and years is just not coming into fruition. And so, like, you have this, it's just this fake echo of what an academic used to be like. Academics, what does an academic do? Academics go and they get a lot of sources, and they talk and they publish papers, and then they have the right ideas. And that's what an academic is. That's not what an academic should be. An academic is someone who's genuinely curious about factual questions, and who genuinely wants to engage in debates over factual questions, and who's genuinely curious about his opponent's worldview and getting it right. But that's nowhere to be seen here. In fact, any honest engagement with these right-wing perspectives on the fact is anathema because it threatens the political narrative, which is really the only reason why Matt McManus is where he is. Once that political narrative fails, which it obviously will, because there's not enough room for people with Matt McManus's career path in the academy anymore. There's not enough spaces, and the people who are going to fill those spaces certainly are not of Matt McManus's sex or or skin tone. Well, let's put it that way. And so it's not even going to work. And in the meantime, you just have this sort of fake, artificial residue. Okay, final thing, and this is the last. The last kind of dialectic of the cope and the fake is the AI versus third posting. So, okay, I'm going to show some pictures that are inappropriate for a Christian audience. So please be warned. They're appropriate for YouTube because this was floating around Twitter. But those for a sensitive audience, please log off. I need this to demonstrate scientific purpose, so you're warned. This week, we discovered that our artificial intelligence natural language processors, as we always knew, could produce really, really, really good replicas of human females that are entirely original. Sorry about that. So it used to be that you would have artificial intelligence generate females, and they would look something like this, right? Not the most attractive. This is basically a composite of what we used to call eigen faces back in the day, sort of fundamental facial elements to construct a new face. But thankfully, due to the update in artificial intelligence's training set, these are your new artificial females, right? These women don't exist. These are not actual human females. These are complete figments of an artificial intelligence's attempt to replicate pornography by filtering in a ton of OnlyFans photos and then shitting out this picture of plastic blonde crap in lingerie, and yeah, it's super sexy or whatever. This is, I mean, I don't want to pause on this picture too much because, this is pornographic and I'm against this stuff and, thirst posting. Though I need to reflect on this picture a little bit. This tells me something. This tells me that in about 10 years, we're going to have an entire generation of men that are probably going to be addicted to OnlyFans that's all generated by artificial intelligence ran by other men who run OnlyFans. This, for anyone who's interested, should be the death of thirst posting on the internet. My default reaction, okay, that's enough of that. My default reaction to any of this, thirst posting from now on is it's an artificial. This is generated by an AI. This is generated by an AI. It's and the anime stuff too. I mean, what are you doing? When what the 2020s have brought about, either through this trans stuff or through artificial intelligence, is it's basically assured us that there will be an unending amount of images of nude female bodies that are very obviously not attached to real women. Now, as a young man, I'm going to quote my friend Black Horse here and saying, you have a choice in front of you. What do you actually want? Do you actually want a woman? For all of human history up until this point, the question of do you want a woman and do you want something that sexually responds and looks like a woman were the same question. Lilith was entirely hypothetical. Lilith being the form of Eve that's not of Adam's blood, but is somehow ethereal and partially demonic. The seductress in pagan stories, the mother of the Fae, the mermaid, the siren that drowns the sailors, the unreproductive sex. This was entirely in mythology up till this point. Up till this point in history, Eve was the only game in town. This week, Lilith just popped on by. Do you want a woman, or do you want the image of a woman? Do you want the simulacra of a woman? Do you want the product of female sexuality divorced from the female herself? Divorced from what it means to be molded by a woman, to be worthy of a woman. No other man outside of very strange circumstances and mythology has ever had to make this choice before. But this is the choice that confronts modern men in the 21st century. In 2023, Lilith has become real, and you have to choose between her and Eve. And I'm going to have to say this right now, but Lilith is Cope. Nobody, when they were young, when their parents raised them, and were proud of them, when they took their step through life, saw themselves in the mirror and said, I want to marry an algorithm. I want to dedicate my life to masturbation. I don't care about relationships with a mate. I just want to have a reflection, fully sexualized. Nobody wants that. The only reason why we can convince ourselves that is because of Cope. Because we're too actually afraid to acknowledge the actual world we live in. So we can't acknowledge that un-PC ideas are right. We can't acknowledge that HBD is reality. We can't acknowledge that the Nordic model does not work outside of Norway and is increasingly not working inside Scandinavia as the demographics of Scandinavia change. We won't acknowledge that our financial system is completely shot. We won't acknowledge that we need to completely revolutionize our sexual culture in order for the human race to survive. So we cope. And it's not even our cope, it's our parents' cope. And now we have the option to be little dancing puppets of fakeness on this stage. We can pretend to be a professor and never have an original idea. We can pretend to be Christian and never actually practice a religion. We can pretend to have a relationship and just jerk off to an AI. You want to cope, or do we want to live? If I'm going to have a relationship, well, I already do, but I mean, it's going to be with a woman. If I'm going to engage in academic pursuits, it's going to be about the truth. And if I'm going to actually have an alternative university, it's not going to be about preserving my own impression as the lone truth teller in an institution that's rapidly disintegrating. It's actually going to be making a break with the system. And that's more or less the message we had to take to this. I mean, what do people actually want? And this is my thing too with the anime stuff. And some people have gotten addicted to this idea. I mean, when it comes to these sort of reactions to human forms that are sexual and kind of pornographic, it's the pornographic reaction that's the real problem. It's putting yourself in a position where you're saying the important thing about this image is the fact that it's inspiring lust in me. That's the important thing about it. It's triggering a dopamine response. That's what's important. Now, of course, we all know. We all know from the history of art that there are many pictures of nude women. There are many pictures of beautiful women in art. But was that the point? Was the experience you're supposed to get of the Venus de Milo or any of the Greek statues of Nike or Athena? Is the point you're supposed to get that this inanimate object inspires lust in me? Is that the relationship you're supposed to have with the object? For a time, this was an academic question. It's not an academic question any longer. If you're going to react to something publicly and make this part of your public persona, you have to have some kind of understanding of your relationship to it. And if your relationship to a non-real woman is to essentially Obviously we're men. We react to non-real things. That's sort of the curse of Adam in a lot of ways. But to sort of publicly embrace that as as part of your persona, and as part of what you aspire to be, is to kind of fundamentally say that the creators of artificiality own you. Because the one thing you can control is how you embody your instinct. And to sort of, and this is challenging for men too. It's challenging for me, as somebody who previously struggled with pornography. I mean, it's challenging for you to say, my desires should only be directed towards Eve and not to Lilith, not to the simulacrum, but to the real. But that's the only reaction you can have. That's the only reaction to AI art too. The only reaction to AI art is to have a different relationship to art. Art is about the communication of humanity with humanity and of realities that exist therein. And simulacrum can only obscure that relationship. And the same thing is true of the sexual urge. The same thing is true of our quest for truth. The same thing is true for our quest of peoplehood. We lost those things. If we lost them, then let's acknowledge it's lost and try to find something else that's real. If we have had our ethnicity as Native Californians destroyed and deracinated and obliterated by consumerism, then let's try to find some remnant of what that means and what that meant and preserve it and cultivate it, rather than convincing ourselves that we're simply, we're simply the tertiary attendants to somebody else's ethnic project, or that we're some kind of automatons that just get programmed with the Constitution, or that we're undifferentiatable practitioners of an increasingly vague Christian spirituality. I guess that's better than having no practice spirituality out of politics, but it still feels like cope. Because we all know what we're called to be. We all know that we're called to be people who have culture, who have a heritage, who have a religious faith that's practiced outside of politics, and that engage with academic questions with some amount of curiosity. And we either pursue that or we cope. And that will be the end of the talk for tonight. So anyway, I'm going to go take the intermission now, guys. I'll answer the super chats in the second half of the show. See you in a few minutes. right, guys, I'm back. Time to answer the super chats. I had to remember what I did with them. Okay, I think it's just... there we go. Okay, time to answer super chats. Okay. So hopefully I can get these done a little bit faster since that the monologue went a little bit longer than usual today. But thanks everyone for donating on Entropy. The Entropy link is in the description, and we'll keep on going here. So, Suspicious Hamster for $3 USA. How would you handle your girlfriend being skeptical of changing her last name after marriage? Well, I think this is fairly straightforward. First of all, a lot of this depends on what your girlfriend's reasons are for not wanting to change her name after marriage. The thing is that not changing your name after marriage is just kind of stupid. It kind of creates this weird dynamic in the family, and there's a reason. There's just a practical reason why women used to do this. Obviously, the most the most common problem is the name of the children. Here's how you'd handle it, and I again, the obvious thing you need to know in order to handle this really well is whether your girlfriend is from some kind of feminist background, or this is just her being stubborn, or if her family, like she has a feminist aunt who's telling her something like this. That you kind of need to know where this idea comes from to handle it more successfully or more surgically. But the common way to handle this problem, or really any problems that are kind of, fundamentally irrational, in my opinion, from women, is a frame game. Because women are, and this is something that you should try to use sparingly, because it's really irritating always to get frame gamed. But women are very, very susceptible to this mode of thought. So this is something that Kofifi Annan brought up in his talk with Alex Kashuta, is that it's impossible essentially to prove something. So this is essentially how Christians lost the atheist-Christian debates, is that the atheist-Christian debates were structured so that one side had to bring evidence and the other side had to set the standards. So the atheists set the standards for evidence, the Christians brought evidence, and the atheists just could revise their standards upwards, and the goalpost would just continuously be shifting backwards. And so, Kofifi Annan famously said, "Oh, you can't convince me that he had some ridiculous proposition, like, all differences between groups of people are entirely genetic, when obviously they're both partially genetic and partially cultural, right?" But what you do is people would engage with him on Twitter, and no matter what evidence they gave, he'd be like, "Well, that's not quite enough evidence. I still don't understand why you believe this. Like, that's not very good. That's just one paper." The sort of Reddit brain people do this all the time. It's super irritating, but it can be quite effective in these conversations with sort of points that aren't very well considered. The way you want to frame this suspicious hamster is just ask her, like, well, why do you not want to share a common name? I don't get it. Like, what benefit would there be for us as a couple if we had different names? I don't understand. You think that? Would that really be a good enough reason not to share a common name? Not to have the same name as our children? Are you saying that our children wouldn't have the same name as both of us? Would they only have my name? Would people know that they were your children? What are you going to do? You're going to have our children have different names, like one child will have your last name, one child will have my last name. We're going to hyphenate it. What will happen to the children that they have? It just doesn't make any sense. Well, I don't know. This doesn't seem like a good enough reason. Like, why would you want this? And then, if it really comes down to it, you can kind of pull the sovereign authority card if you want to, depending on your relationship with this woman, and to say, like, no, I think this is a very good idea for us to have the same name, and and try never to insist on things, never pose it as an ultimatum, but this is say something like, I think this is what we're going to do, is this, I think this is what we're going to do. And treat it like it's already decided, and there has to be a really good reason for it not to be decided in the opposite direction. Because there are really no good reasons to have different names as a married couple. It implies the marriage is going to end. It implies that one partner is not going to have the same name as the children. It means that there's going to be multiple last names in the same family. So the family will never be the Adams family or the Smith family or the Green family or the whatever family. It will simply be, blah, 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 like 5 names, right? Family. So you're sacrificing everything that a major element of you being a cohesive family unit and of you being a couple, like a cohesive couple. And for what? Like, what's the benefit? So that when you get divorced, it will be easier. And when you pose it that way, I think the conversation will go better in your direction. Obviously, be careful with the frame game stuff, guys. It's, I'm not going to say it's a dishonest tactic, but it is a really irritating one. And, especially with women husbands who'd be very, very sparing about how they apply frame games to their wives. Women aren't stupid. They'll realize they're being manipulated and they'll start to resent it. But doing it playfully or in certain circumstances so that an unnecessary argument doesn't happen can be effective. And it's a great way to sort of massage over marital problems, is just to frame things in a way where the sale is already assumed, this is how things are, and there's not really a good reason, and okay, that's a good point, but it's just not good enough to overcome just the way things are. Another thing that Kofi Viannan brought up in his talk about feminized workplaces was this idea of how HR departments work is they punish anybody who can be portrayed as having taken a special action. So when something goes wrong, the person who did something is the person responsible. And everyone else who's not responsible, they're just, that's just the way we do things. This is just my responsibility. This is what I always do. This is what I was told to do. Any act of will is what's punished. So the way you want to pose this in the frame game is, this is already decided, this is the wise thing to do, and now, your will is coming into this cohesive frame, and it's creating a disruption. And I don't see why there needs to be this disruption. Women typically are very conflict averse, so this usually works in most cases. Ben White for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. I had a good time at the bar. I got some good scoops on what's happening behind the scenes at work. The music was super loud, though. I had to yell to be heard by the people right next to me. Yeah, that's what I hate about bars, is that they crank the music up so loud that you can't hear the other person talk. Usually, if there's a side room where the music's a little bit more quiet, it's a little bit more tolerable. But especially if you go clubbing or something like that, the music is just, it drowns out everything, and you're basically signing to each other while you hear, bad pop hits from the last 3 years. Last time I was doing this, I think it was Carly Rae Jepsen's "Call Me Maybe." They played that song so much. Oh my God, my eardrums, they were just bleeding with that song. It's such an earworm. It was. I think that probably caught me to swear off the whole scene for the rest of my adult life. So, well, it's good on you. We are slowly de-atomizing. I guess it's a step in the right direction. I'll go on to your next question, Ben White. I also enlightened a normie girl by telling her of ethnic tensions and conflicts in East and Southeast Asia. She was like, wow, there's racism everywhere, not just in the U.S. One step at a time, boys. Oh man, you mean like there's racism everywhere? That's so screwed up. So I can't do the 20-year-old woman voice. It's not in me. But yeah, okay, you guys can skip that in the VOD if you're watching with the ability to fast forward. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is just kind of the product of modern millennial education is that history began in 1968. The only bad guy is Adolf Hitler, who ruled the olden days with his accomplices, the Ku Klux Klan, until Dr. Martin Luther King and the United States of America liberated the world from white racism and instituted the reign of DEI, which would make all of the world equalist under socialism, just like the Nordic model. Socialism, just like the Nordic model. And non-teleological morality, guys. Don't forget that. Very important. All your moralisms and finger wagging has to be non-teleological. All your eschatological, millenarian utopianism has to be non-teleological. Very, very important there. This is just the modern millennial education. And it's really funny. If you can get... History has so many stories that belie richer and more deep things than sort of the bland cathedral narrative. And if you can make yourself a really good storyteller, becoming a really good teller of stories is an amazing thing for both creating friendships with yourself and other men and also meeting women. As I always tell young men, if you want to get good at impressing women, get good at impressing and influencing other men. If you can impress and influence other men and you're confident and hold yourself well around them, then you will probably, on average, do very well with women. And this is the thing, like being able to hold yourself a certain way and being able to have a certain level of self-confidence is such a missing quality in most modern men. I guess this is sort of what the internet's taken away from us a little bit, and COVID certainly hasn't helped this, is that when young men reach a certain age, they need to know how to hold themselves in a way that indicates that they know what they want and they're going to pursue it. This is a lesson for women, too, if any women are watching. I mean, both of them, right? This channel is overwhelmingly men. But there was this quandary that was brought to right-wing women. There are some women who are complaining about not being able to find a husband, and some of them were complaining about being too educated or too rich to find husbands that were worthy of them, and so on and so forth. But if there's one thing I have to tell women, if I were in your shoes, and obviously I'm not, so you probably should take my advice with a big grain of salt, because oftentimes the advice other sexes give to the opposite sex are terrible. But I'll tell you one thing, women are right, you are right, women, to pay attention to how men hold themselves. If men hold themselves confidently, then that's probably someone that you should be interested in. If they hold themselves in a way that's not confident or that's very insecure, that man's probably not ready yet for a very serious relationship. That being said, too, the other thing is, and this is very important for women, men have a certain point at their lives when they're ready to marry somebody. And if your guy isn't at that point where he's like, I'm looking for a wife, then you should not be intimately engaged with that man at all, in my opinion. And obviously this age at which men are like, they know in their heart they're looking for a wife. That age keeps on going up and up and up and up and up and up. And you know, this happens with a lot of women, is they find a guy and he's a pretty good guy and he's gonna want to get married at some point, right? But his marriage time frame and her marriage time frame are just totally not overlapping. Like, she's in her early 30s, you know, her clock is kind of ticking a little bit, and you know, he's a similar age and he's obviously not interested in marriage at all. Girls, I don't know if this is something that you can sense in guys. It's something that I feel like I can sense in other men. But you have to understand, is this guy, does he hold himself confidently? And is he actually in the market for a wife? Because oftentimes you can have horrible situations like what happened to Shion Head. There's even an engagement, and then there's cold feet because the guy is just not ready He's just not at that stage of maturity to get married, even if he has some money, even if he has some self-confidence. It's not the right kind of self-confidence. It's not the right kind of direction. And I think a lot of women, I think Juniper Tree is in the chat. She can confirm or deny that. Maybe my wife might be watching this too. Who knows? Man, this room, it's horrible. There's absolutely no insulation from the outside noise from the rest of the house. For those curious, Shion Head was kind of tragically engaged to the YouTuber Armored Skeptic, and that kind of broke off way too late in the relationship. And I don't know exactly what happened, but I think it was very, very obvious that Armored Skeptic, he was confident, he had money, he was not in that era of his life as a guy where he was in the market for a wife. Or he was marrying. He was not in a settling down phase of his life. And it's really tragic because women beat themselves up for not being able to get a guy to settle down, and they just didn't hit him at the right time. And they need to focus on going after guys who are at the right time. Otherwise, they're going to miss this opportunity altogether, and they're going to waste a lot of time. And that's very, very important to not waste time, especially if you're a member of the fairer sex. Okay, going on. Random spam for $5 USA. Hi, Dave, longtime viewer here. Thank you for all the edifying content over the year. I'm deep in a technical PhD program at a very notorious institution at the epicenter of Blue America. Any tips for how to stay motivated and not lose hope? Thanks. Well, hey, I finished I finished a PhD while I started this YouTube channel. I mean, okay. How to not lose hope? I mean, you're a technical degree. You know, you're in a blue city. This is, I was in that position 5 years ago, and look, a PhD in a technical field is going to get you a certain amount of money, and that's just, you have to kind of plan your life around that and say, I'm kind of going through this process to get a position where I can support a family and where I can build something for myself that's independent from other people who want to control me. A PhD will get you fuck you money? Absolutely not. I don't have fuck you money by any stretch of the imagination. But it will, in a technical field, it will get you to the point where you can comfortably support a wife, well, at least until inflation and taxes hit. but you won't be in a poorhouse, right? And so I would advise, typically, most people, if you're in a technical field, just leverage that to your utility. Find out a career path for yourself so that you can land in an area where you can pull a paycheck down, and then find something else edifying in your life that gives you meaning. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I think that there are people who can find meaning in their research, and the research becomes a large part of sort of their life's mission and their life's calling, and being good at this technical field is just that calling for them. And of course they have spirituality on the side, but still it's mainly the technical focus. Increasingly, for a lot of people in technical degrees, this is not the case. So, for many people who have a PhD, and this is something that's very much, and I'm reading in between the lines, random spam, but I'm kind of assuming that this is more your situation. You need to have sort of a third sphere where you can really express your artistic side, your impressions of the universe, your spirituality, and sort of, your masculine will to kind of expand and express yourself in a way that's all your own. And a lot of people find this in religious practice, and some people find this in alternative scholarship. Obviously, in many ways, that's my blog. So, I mean, you will probably be a person that has three spheres of their life. You'll have your professional life, you'll have your home life, and you'll have your sort of third place life, which will, have to exist in the spaces in between the other two, which take up an enormous amount of time. My one caution, though, is with all professionals, we are entering into chaotic times. Your credentials are going to matter for increasingly little. So if you're in a PhD program and you have a small possibility of becoming a professor, you're probably aware that this is a lot narrower than it used to be, right? This is sort of a long shot. Even for very promising students, it's a long shot to be a professor. You have a long shot to be a professor. More often than not, you're going to be, a technical expert inside a corporation or in a profession, right? It is important, since we're entering into chaotic times, to focus on developing skills and making projects. I've said this every time. Always be building. Build your skills, build your projects, build your portfolio. Make your resume not a list of grades and of degrees, but a list of things that you have created and a list of skills that you have ready to be deployed. And if that's your resume, even if your profession completely falls through and you have to go from being a chemical engineer to a computer programmer, or from a computer programmer to an electrical technician, or from your electrical technician to a general mechanic, you will have obtained sort of the gumption, the practical skills of engineering, which are to sort of dissect a problem in the most practical way and the most efficient way. And you will have built for yourself a sort of competence and a technique that you can apply to any career. And employers will respect that if they're interested in getting productive people on their team. And that's what you need to cultivate above all else. So, that being said, thank you very much. Batman Bad for $3 Canadian. My life has improved ever since I took a break from the endless doom posting, blackpilling, and infighting that is so common on the online right. Well, that is certainly great to hear, Batman Bad. I don't know if there's a question there. All I can say is that the right wing is going to have to go from it's going to have to go from a reaction and increasingly less humorous kind of response video format or dunking format to a community building and sort of a quality of thought format. The purpose of the right wing now is to sort of re-engineer real life. Amy Therese had this post, and it's very indicative of the left these days. She had this post where she just indicated she had this. It was just basically a series of photographs from this pamphlet that the DSA of America distributed to its members of how they can sort of target their family to get them to contribute to the Socialist Party. And she had the right reaction. This is sort of cult-like behavior. You have this political organization, and it's advising you to kind of find the weaknesses in your own family so you can sell them on the product of democratic socialism. So you can bring them to the party and get them to write a check to the DSA and to get Bernie Sanders, or more likely just Joe Biden again, elected, right? This is nuts. The purpose of politics is to facilitate the creation of strong families and spiritual people. It's not to facilitate the creation of more political parties. And to the extent that your church and your family are being used to fuel a political movement is the extent to which, in many ways, you stop being a real person. Real people pursue politics so that they can encourage the production of family life and the wealth of their people, and the preponderance of their religious worldview into the future. Their religion and their families do not exist to be sacrificed to the monster of politics. And in the right wing, what we need to facilitate here is we need to facilitate an intellectual space that is more respectable than the academic one currently going on in universities. And if Burgess and McManus are rivals, then I think that's a pretty easy task. A little harder if it's someone like Steven Pinker, but let's start with the B tier first and move our way up, a Mega Man style, to the heavy hitters. But it's to create intellectual space with better quality of thought and more interesting people than currently exists in the academy. And more importantly, I think, and ultimately longer term, it's to sort of build up spiritual practices and communities in real life. This is why basket weaving is something that I'm going to talk about every single time I do a live stream, because it's just so important that the distant right, the distant sphere generally, meets up in real life and starts actually creating local things on the ground. So that your experience of people who don't think like the mainstream actually has instantiation beyond what you're interacting with digitally. Like I said before, there's no reason to watch me unless you actually believe that I'm a real person that has a real life and a real family and a real faith. I mean, I'm not the best Catholic. Oftentimes I'm bottoming out on my obligations because I'm tired and there's not enough obligations. There's not enough hours in the day. I know I do what's required of me. I go to confession, probably not as much as I should, but I like to think that I'm honest about where I am with that and with my perspectives. And that there's no reason for you to be watching me unless you believe that what I'm telling you is coming from a genuinely lived life. And there's no reason to engage in a political movement unless you think it is actually composed of people they're going to make something in the real world, and that are actually going to live real lives. And I'm encouraged when I see people develop kind of cultures of production. You know, I commissioned some art from the YouTuber Poe the Person. I know that she's working more on her art, and I might commission more because I kind of like her cartoony style. I might commission a kid's book illustrated by her if I can afford her prices. But it's just those kind of things, right? Having art that's made by friends, having people who you meet with every month who share your political views so that you're not alone. Having a parish you go to that is at the same level as you are spiritually. These are important things. These are the real important things that are the product of a successful right-wing movement. The successful right-wing movement is not to donate more to something party. That should be a major difference between us and them, but, you know, whatever. World War Free for $5 USA. I find it frustrating that many on the right call Twitter a hell site. It's addictive. However, many useful conversations occur on Twitter. My family has found the info I shared with them from 2019 to early 2022 Twitter to be materially useful. Well, I'm going to both agree and disagree with you here. Obviously, I love Twitter. I have one reason I love using Twitter, the DMs. Because Twitter is like a Rolodex. It's like a Rolodex. It's a place, everyone is on Twitter. And all of the mainstream people are on Twitter. And so if you're trying to plan something with people who are serious, it's a great site to use. Twitter is the absolute worst site for getting into arguments or following spectacle. Like Batman Bad said last time, the propensity to doom post and to just doom scroll is so high. And that's why I think it rightfully deserves the moniker hell site. For instance, I see that you're telling me that your family got something materially out of tweets that came out of 2019 to 2022. But to me, this is, I've never seen this before. How do you have tweets that I mean, I guess there's a few famous tweets that people retweet over and over and over again. But for the most part, Twitter has the memory of a goldfish. No one remembers what goes on in Twitter last week or the week before. It just kind of flows by the wayside. So I'll take your word for it, World War Free, that it's been useful to you in this regard, but that's not really a narrative that I recognize when using Twitter. So thank you very much. And I'll go on here. Probably more to say about that, but I'm going to skip this. There's a lot of super chats to get to. Medwords for $3 USA. Howdy. On campus, I'm in a left-leaning Catholic discussion group. Feels dispiriting to often hear peers and faculty basically treat Catholic principles as equivalent to progressive policy. Continued. Okay, I'll continue that. As if is half of this in the questions tab. Okay, this is irritating. It's not pinning. I'll just read it. As if stewardship of creation, concern for the poor, and human dignity equals talking point about carbon tax or dismantling systematic oppression. Also, I've been accepted into some PhD math programs. Well, congratulations. I mean, I think math programs, I think that's, mathematics is a great profession. Make sure that, make sure you have that third place for yourself. I mean, the advice I gave about technical PhD programs still applies. Make sure you're building things and not just accumulating grades. Be cautious of contacts with people who will cancel you. Those are always untrustworthy. And, congratulations. But when I guess this is why I always like talking to progressives. When you engage with progressives about talking points, you kind of want to break the frame. You don't want to. The last thing you want to do is, if they're talking about climate change, is try to refute climate change. The thing that you want to do is you want to kind of communicate your skepticism about how you never seen this material and make the world a better place. And you kind of want to pull the Kofifi Annan game, where if they give you evidence, it's just not quite enough. With climate change, it's easy, because really none of the trillions of dollars we spent on this have ever really materially made the world a better place, other than, starving Germany of energy. So this is excuse me. I did a video on this called Striking from Within the Walls. It was one of the early videos I did about the culture war, or resisting progressive institutions from the inside. This was like 2017, really early in my YouTube career. And the takeaway is you never want to resist the institution from within. What you want to do is you just want to shift yourself into a mode of pure skepticism and react to the progressive talking points with sort of a detachment and sort of a desire for something more. And then if people are curious about what you want, you can engage them on your own terms and within your own time. But do not directly challenge the group, because that's exactly what they're trying to get out of you. They're trying to get out of you because they have all the responses written down. They have sort of like a flow chart about how they're supposed to shame you when you step out of line, and feed them some some sort of opposition research about this fact or that fact about global warming. And unless you're really, really good and really, really nimble, you're going to get the worst end of that. Furthermore, if you challenge a group leader inside a group, what happens is that the group leader presents you as if you're stopping the ordinary business of the group. So you could be meaning to discuss like a controversy, but as always, the person who disagrees with the consensus is seen as being kind of somebody who's slowing everyone else down, that they're retarding the purpose of this meeting. So it's never a very good position to be in, because you're kind of pissing off all the people who just kind of want to get through it all, who just kind of want to get the check marks and move on to the next thing. And so you really have to kind of shift things into low gear and take things from that perspective. But thank you. Oh, is this the continuation? Okay, well, I guess it was double posted. Okay, next one. Estancia Sanes for $3 USA. What do you think of Bionicle series lore as a piece of reactionary media? I have never seen Bionicles. If you know nothing about it, I recommend the movie as a fun but relatively deep children's intro to reactionary values. Thank you, Science, for the recommendation. Yeah, I've never seen Bionicles. I can't see myself watching. I mean, pardon me, but isn't Bionicles a Lego movie of some kind? Am I not getting that right? It's a Lego movie. I had someone in my old Discord who was really into Bionicles, but back then it was kind of made fun of as being sort of an obsession that kind of, it was an autistic obsession, not to, use a bad word, right? I shouldn't, using medical conditions is pejorative, is typically in bad form, so I'll refrain. But no, it's a good, I should watch it, right? If it genuinely has reactionary sentiments in it. I'll probably get to it after I finally watch Berserk, which is the other one people tell me I should always watch. The thing is these days is though the medium really matters to me, and sort of kids TV shows and young adult literature and anime, the form, it kind of goes to the bottom of my list really quickly. I'm kind of at the point in my life where based young adult fiction is always kind of looked at as, okay, sure, I'm sure you have those few moments when you make a good point. You kind of break from the cathedral perspective on the universe, but you're still, a story about kid wizards, or you're still a TV show that's animated in the Cal art style. And I watched Adventure Time, and I kind of liked it. I kind of liked its broad historical sweeping vision of a crazy, wacky world. But at the same time, it was still kind of the typical Reddit style entertainment, right? The young adult fiction, and to me, that's just not where my mind is these days. My mind is more like, this thing I have is eternal. This thing I have is something that, really, it's not an entertainment product. It's meant to be something more. And Bionicles, I'm always going to be aware of it as an entertainment product, which is why it's going to be hard for me to really get into that. But thank you for the suggestion anyway. Okay, Novum for $5. Novum says, military recruitment numbers have been declining and politicians are freaking out about boys wearing pink pearls. So that's what makes me think they're going to reinstate the draft in a new package within the next decade, war or not. Thoughts? Well, they reinstitute the draft. I feel like the game is up narratively for the cathedral. I feel that's going to break their coalition in two. Reinstituting the draft is going to, it's going to, that would be a hard thing for the progressive cathedral to swing. I'll say that. I don't know how they would do that in present day. Because maybe they could pose it as some kind of national service, and maybe if all of the opinion molding apparatuses at the cathedral get on board, they'll be able to make it sound good. But that would be a very difficult circle for them to square, so to speak, and it's hard for me to imagine how they would narratively do that. I don't know. Maybe they could. The question is, after COVID, I feel like they could do almost anything, right? Which is sort of the depressing thing about all of this is that, okay, they couldn't house arrest America for 2 years. Well, they did it. The cathedral being the cathedral, it can change its mind. And, but once, the draft comes into play, reality gets a lot more real. The entertainment product that is the cathedral gets a lot more real. And this is the fundamental asymmetry of the political dynamics, is that the right wing wins real, the left wing wins fake. So the more fake reality gets, and fakeness is driven by Cope, as was sort of the thesis of my talk earlier tonight. As reality gets more fake, it gets more left wing. As it gets more real, it gets more right wing. They reinstitute the draft, things get a lot more real, a lot faster. And people will start asking themselves real questions. And unless their thought control has gotten a lot better, which it hasn't, their thought control has gotten significantly worse in the last 10 years, they're going to have a serious narrative problem. And that could metastasize into a political split very quickly. And they know that, which is why I think I'm very skeptical about them doing that. I know their recruitment numbers are low. I know they're struggling to fight Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and escalating at every opportunity they possibly have. But this creates so many problems for them. I don't know if it would be worth it for them. Remember, the whole point of the left is to make their narrative work and to give themselves jobs and money. And there doesn't seem to be any, at least currently, there doesn't seem to be any money in that idea that I can see. Ben White for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. I'm beginning to see the left's rejection of reality as analogous to Satan's rebellion. Satan rejected God's divine revelation. Leftists reject that and natural revelation. Is it fitting to say that today's progressives are satanic? Well, I mean, this is a common thing, right? It goes back to Samuel Johnson's famous pronouncement that the devil was the first Whig. And of course, there's that famous quote from Saul Alinsky where he dedicates his book to Satan. And of course, there's a whole type of Gnostic tradition where the snake in the Garden of Eden was a liberating, emancipatory force from the strictures of a demiurge that wanted to keep mankind ignorant. This association, and there's a connection there because the left is chaotic, right? The left, I wouldn't say it's equivalent to chaos, but its reproductive life cycle is dependent on taking ordered systems and breaking them down and breaking sort of the bonds of trust, and then taking that excess need and filtering it into a managerial economy that is essentially populated by bureaucrats and becomes part of its political funding apparatus. That's what the left does. And, and part of that is very satanic because of its connection to chaos. Insofar as there's a fundamental difference between the left and Satan, though, is that, and maybe this will change, and I think you see some of it in some leftists. You can see that they have a sort of contempt for reality. And Satan's rebellion against God is not created out of ignorance. It's created out of full knowledge and total contempt. Whereas the left's rebellion against nature is, it's sort of the flip side of the right-wing cope, right? In some sense, they do know that they're wrong, but they don't know the way that Satan knows. They only suspect that they're wrong. And so their rebellion and their rejection of reality is simply them trying to escape facing unfortunate but necessary truths and retreating to a formula that feels good and that gives them power and clout, but sort of obscures sort of the reality we're dealing with in present day 21st century West. So I think you're onto something, but some critical differences there. And my voice is just giving out a little bit. I have to maximize this here. Okay. Recovering midwit for $5 USA. It seems to me that in most dissident right circles, YouTubers, etc., is made up of single young men under 30. It seems that there is a lack of maturity, and it would be beneficial to the cause. Well, I'm not single. There are a series of, most of the older people in the circle, whether it's Academic Agent or Radlib or Black Horse or there's a few other ones too. These are older millennials. We're married now. We're having families. We're hopefully expanding them, God willing, obviously. You never can count on that, but God willing. So the new blood is always going to be young men. The problem is, and this is the thing, I made a mistake doing this. Mentorship is necessary, but I think it's really impossible online. I think mentorship is absolutely impossible online. A great example is Twitter. I mean, the real issue here, I'm drinking in the hope that I can restore my voice to keep on going. But the real problem we're dealing with is the attention economy online. So anyone who has a Telegram feed or who's on a Discord server knows how this works. Group chats are dominated by people who can be the most ostentatious and who can grab everyone's attention and who can be disruptive without actually contributing anything to the community. Whereas mostly what you want to impart to new content creators, to new activists, is to always prioritize the deeper over just grabbing people's attentions. So if you're a YouTuber like myself, if you do YouTube, try to write more essays and do less shitposty streams like what I'm doing right now. This is a pattern, this is a schedule, so I have to do it. But, always aspire to be the next thing. If you write Substack, aspire to write a book. And when you write, always try to tackle the hardest problems. Always walk towards the fire of controversy. Don't back down. Don't rehash other people's points. Try to synthesize and come up with new things and actually process things and move the community forward. Try to be a utility for other people. And this is a very difficult thing to mentor people to do online because all of the incentives towards maturity are pointed in the opposite direction online. Online, everyone's encouraged to be an adolescent consumer. Even if you're not inclined to do that ordinarily, that's what you're encouraged to do via the attention economy and via the algorithm. Now, people in basket weaving circles, people in Sildings and Old Glory Club, these organizations we have, we're talking about ways that we can possibly push back against this and encourage people to do more long-form stuff. But this is, for the time being, mentorship and maturity has to be developed in the real world, which is, again, why I think the basket weaving project is really the project of 2023 writ large. So thank you very much, Recovering Midwit. You have another super chat that just says hi. Well, hello too. Thank you very much. Thank you for the donation. Okay. Ben White for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. Why do you think the protests after the Tyre Nichols death were not as bad as George Floyd? Most people say it's because all of the cops were black. I think it's because the media didn't apply as much pressure. They applied way more pressure in 2020. Yeah, that was so I don't want to toot my own horn here, but a lot of people were predicting huge riots in this whole. There's this black guy that got killed under questionable circumstances by cops who were also all black, and you had, of course, the activist left, blowing their horn and calling for riots, and people were going, "Oh, there's another round of riots coming because some black people killed another black person." Yeah, sure. I was skeptical about that because it tells you something, right? Because the activist portion of the left, the far left, they always want to be rioting. They always want to be protesting. Every single time has to go up to 11. Because it's the worst thing ever. That's how their attention economy works. That's how they get their funding. But the establishment right now is a really, really, really bad time to have a riot. It's in winter. There's not an election coming. The Republicans are in their first 100 days. If public opinion turns in their favor, they could have to make some concessions. Their agenda would be held back. So you can tell that the mainstream media is going to be tapping on the brakes, and as with all things, like the relative power of the activist class and the manager class of the left, they're in constant tension. But it's situations like this where you can really see whether the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is wagging the tail. And for the time being, at least, on this particular issue, it appears that the dog is still wagging its tail. It appears that the managers are still somewhat in control of their activists. And they're not going to let this riot go on because it's bad optics for them, right? And just because the activists want to have good television. But thank you very much, Ben White. Society Man for USA $5. Have you ever attended one of those basket weaving sessions? Do you know anyone else who has? There is one upcoming in my area, and I'm curious if you can say anything about the quality of people attending. Well, I don't know specifically about the quality of people attending in your area, Society Man. The basket weaving events I have attended have been obviously in New Jersey and New York area, and there's right now we've got about 4 regulars or so, and we're expanding it, and it can go up or it can go down depending on what's going on that weekend or what people are trying to put together. I don't know what your area looks like. It's just, for the first time, it's going to have to be a leap of faith. I think eventually it's going to have to be that content creators are just going to have to stick their hand up and go, if you're in this area, I can be there, once every month or once every 2 months, just so new people can come to the big events and they'll know like a content creator there, and they'll be able to have a solid person that's established. Because showing up with a bunch of people who just are in a Discord server is oftentimes disconcerting. I used to do that all the time with meetup groups. I'm dating myself saying that. So I'm comfortable with just walking into a bar and saying, "Hey guys, are you from the internet? Nice to meet you." But I agree. If the quality of people is like the average person on Discord, you're in for a wild ride. But the thing is that as basket weaving groups proceed, and we haven't had any that have gone on for very long, they're still sort of a nascent form, that they will filter for the people who are more serious and who want to actually produce things that are long-standing. They want to actually have solid relationships, and they're not just there to kind of be there for the spectacle. All of the people, I had one person who I met in real life who was a total psycho, very infamously. But other than that, most people who I met in real life have been very good people. And, because I have this YouTube channel, I can kind of create a little bit bigger of a splash of these things sometimes. And so more people show up. But I've been genuinely pretty impressed with the quality of people. So my advice is just to test the waters and see what it looks like. I apologize if you have a bad area, but it's just something that we have to kind of do a leap of faith on. But thank you very much, Society Man. I appreciate it. Novum for $5 USA. Weekly Texas Post. Maybe not rural areas, but having grown up in Dallas-Fort Worth area, I'd say we did a good job as far as assimilating immigrants in Red America goes. Many generations of Middle Eastern and Asian populations have found a home and work here. Well, I applaud you on this effort, but and that's what's going to need to happen, right? What's going to need to happen is that there's going to need to be some kind of ethnogenesis. There's going to need to be a synthesis of cultures, or simply a breaking away and a making of a patchwork, in the sense of where you have sort of like Native American communities, and then you have Anglo communities, and so on and so forth. There's going to have to be a re-normalization of American social society. The problem is, Novum, is that these individual cases in the aggregate don't work for Red America. First of all, just on the numbers of voters, you win 1, Blue America wins 2. And like in all sports games, if you're playing a game where every time you score 1 point, your opponent scores 2, you're losing that game very, very quickly. Second of all, without the process of ethnogenesis and renormalization, as you're assimilating these new divergent groups, the specificity of your culture and the specific, I'm repeating myself, the specificity of your culture and the peculiarity of your culture becomes lessened. It becomes more general. It has to be a big tent because it accommodates all of these various cultures from all over the place. The classic example is having a group of people who are all European in origin and who are all Christian. In that community, you can all celebrate a common set of tropes, although they're very, very broad, and a common set of religious practices. Once you have like Muslim communities and Hindu communities coming into the mix, those common tropes, those common cultural heroes, those common religious ceremonies aren't going to be common anymore. And so again, there has to be either a renormalization or a separation before anything really, really deep and meaningful and constraining can come into play. And that's really the critical thing. Unless a culture can constrain your will, it's not going to be deep. Unless a relationship constrains you in some way, it's not going to be real. This is nothing that Matt McManus you could see this in his assumptions. Oh, well, immigrants are better, he said recently on Twitter, because they chose America, and America didn't choose them. And that's why their relationship with America is deeper. This is in contravention to most human experiences. Certainly, our decisions define us morally speaking, in a God's eye point of view. But when it comes to relationships, the most powerful relationships we have are those that we have not chosen, are the relationships that in many ways have chosen us. We didn't choose our relationship with God. God chose his relationship with us. And that's the most important relationship there is. We didn't choose our relationship with our family. And, when it comes down to things that we did choose, like our marital partners, what makes that very, very deep is the constraint that goes into the marriage, the oath. When communities get very, very, very diverse, it becomes very, very, very difficult to define a set of constraining norms. Now, ultimately, through the process of ethnogenesis, in 100 years, if the cultures are close enough, you can overcome this problem. But you're not going to assimilate this problem away. You're not going to assimilate faster than mass migration can bring new people into your country that have radically divergent values from yours. So unfortunately, this Joel Berry idea that Red America can assimilate their way out of the immigration problem is absolutely nutso. It's absolute copium from bottom to top. And I think everyone knows that, right? Okay, Batman Bad says, what do you think of fisted by, I think FBF means fisted by Foucault. What do you think of fisted by Foucault's claim that America is heading for global dominance rather than decline? Well, I said this before. I mean, he's kind of right and wrong. This is fisted by Foucault's thesis that's called Turbo America. America's power has only grown in the last 20 years, but its ability to be convincing and deep has waned and waned and waned and waned. So it's become harder, but it's also become more brittle. And this is the era when decline sets in very precipitously. You could see this within later Caesars. Later Caesars like Marcus Aurelius. They were uncontested militaristically. But at the same time, the core of what Rome was had long since passed. There were no great artists. There were no great achievements. There was just sort of this idea that we would keep the empire running for as long as possible. And now, herein comes the possibility that in Spengler's vision, America is going to be mummified by a Caesar. That it's going to become brittle but stable under a Caesar who will make sure that we don't fall into chaos, but at the same time kind of bring a close to our Promethean phase of cultural expansion and optimism. I have been a person who's a skeptic of this. I don't think Faustian man can have this part, this civilizational piece where you just kind of manage the decline. I think as soon as it's apparent that we're managing the decline, which it is for a lot of people, people are going to fall into a deep despair, and they're going to find ways to kill themselves. They're going to find ways to bring their culture tumbling down and to find new things that are generative and optimistic. America is the perfect example. America's power is growing as America's optimism is decreasing. But America's power was optimism. What does it even mean to be an American empire that's not optimistic? It's not an empire that anybody who is properly American would want to be part of, because America's whole core ethos was its optimism for the future. And so what you're describing is something that's infinitely, it's infinitely unmalleable, but it's also hollow. And eventually that thing is going to shatter. I think that it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger until it finally cracks. And then it's going to come down all very, very quickly. And that's my assumption, Batman bad. But, who knows, obviously. It's a prediction about the future. Ben White for $3 USA. Speaking of assimilation, I don't think any new immigrants want to assimilate. The media portrays America as being evil, not something to be respected, much less to be assimilated into. Immigrants don't want to be white. There's, as Steve Saylor puts it, there is the great flight from white that's going on. Immigrant groups that used to be considered white are no longer we don't consider them right. They don't consider themselves white because it's not a productive. I just lost my page here. It's not a productive. There's no incentive to want to be white. There's no incentive to want to be part of core America. But that being said, assimilation, if you don't think assimilation is going on, have you looked at modern American campuses? UC Berkeley, you might think that Asian students are a natural ally for the right, but you haven't seen what Asians look like after they come out of 4 years of the modern academy. They're all 100% signed on to the global American progressive agenda. They're 100% on the shitlib bandwagon. The global American empire is not assimilating these people into white bread America of the 1960s or 1990s well-to-do affluent America. It's assimilating them into LGBTQ+. It's assimilating them into oppression culture. Now, what that does is it creates a lot of perpetually angry patrician classes that they all have their grievance and who want to raid the coffers of the state and of the collective to basically, I would say pay their own groups, but let's be honest, pay themselves fancy salaries as professional grievance mongers. But that's ultimately not sustainable. So, this is the thing. I said this to Aaron McIntyre. Blue America, they are amazing at assimilating people, but they've grown increasingly bad at making the people they assimilate at all productive citizens. And so you're going to get a crescendo of sort of shit liberty and identity politics as the assimilation engine of Blue America keeps on cranking on. Well, its wealth generating engine and where its productive citizen generating engine completely fall apart. And once those sort of effects encounter each other, that's when sort of the supremely brittle core of the American empire starts cracking and falling away. That's my prediction, at least. All right, Ben White for another one here. The immigrants will stick around to their ethnic groups and perhaps even allow foreign states to exert real influence and control in the U.S. After all, why be loyal to a country that you've been told is evil? Yeah, there'll be a certain segment of them that are grievance mongers, and there'll be a certain segment of them that are sort of ethno-nationalist. That's sort of, in many ways, they'll do the same thing that white America does, except that it'll be easier to synthesize their ethno-nationalists with their grievance mongers, because the grievance mongers will all point to white America, whereas white grievance mongering classes, white shiplibs, tried to undermine their own community. The thing is that the synthesis that they will come to between the professional classes, the elites that want to be ethno-nationalist for their own group, and the elites that want to be sort of signed on to the straight-up progressive project of deconstructing everything, their interests are going to be fundamentally synthesized by raiding white core America for whatever remaining wealth it has available. And eventually that well is going to run completely dry. And they're going to become essentially enemies of the state. And sort of the game's going to be up. So, I mean, there's only so much wealth that can be taken out of the system before the thing collapses, Ben White. So, you know, the system is not sustainable. Can it last for 10 or 20 more years? Probably. Can it last for 100 more years? Almost certainly not. And so your guesses inside that period are kind of, who knows what's going on there, right? Hopefully we'll be able to build an alternative before the whole thing explodes. But, that has yet to be seen. World War Free for $5 USA. I got to get going because, again, I'm running out of my voice here. My last post was about Twitter not being a hell site, but I understand now. Dunking on Joel from the Babylon Bee is cruel. I hope after this lesson, instead of jokes about the foibles of prayer circles, the Bee will start discussing the JQ and HBD. Well, no, I don't want them to do that, right? I'm happy for the Babylon Bee to continuously make its jokes about wokies. That's fine. But I don't know what to say about this. I mean, the only way out of this is to rediscover what it means to have deep communities and to have deep culture and to understand that your interests are your people's interests and not some other global project on the far side of the world. If you want to be the pawn of globalization, I don't know. Your comedy is going to sound different because at the end of the day, if you're not fighting for your own faith and your own people, you're somebody else's tool. And so the joke of the wokies, you can laugh at it, but you're its butt. All that big core America that everybody, all the other ethnic groups, all the other interest groups are going to start raiding because it's the only undefended territory. You're holding your hand up high and saying, please, please me. Make me the villain of history. Make me the person who doesn't exist, that needs to be deestablished so that the rest of the world can make this liberal illusion go on for 10 more years. Maybe you're less cringe than the people who think that they're purple gender or whatever. But you're going to get screwed over faster than they are. So, laugh. It's literally, you're literally laughing at your own funeral. And lefties can rightfully laugh at you for huffing copium. All right. Giovanni Cabato for $5 USA. My last post was about Twitter. Wait, I already did that one. Oh, it's a question. Okay. Giovanni Cabato for $5 USA. This reminds me of stories of the Weather Underground and how they would openly debate killing white babies. How can you even capture the university system when they are the gatekeepers of that system? Well, I mean, you can't. And it's not, the Weather Underground isn't really your problem. Your problem is a bunch of admins who are in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and who would have no other job if a diversity, equity, and inclusion went away. If the universities stopped having this ideology, an entire administrative class would disapparate. And all those people are going to be exerting political pressure continuously to make sure that the university follows their ideology to a T. These people have to be fired, or the educational institution just has to be moved. The academy has to move to some other area that's not beholden to these bureaucrats, because they will totally ideologically dominate everything. But thank you very much, Gabato. I'm going to move on more quickly because I will run out of my voice in about 10 minutes, and I've got an increasingly large number of super chats plus a psalm to read. Importing migrants from the third... So Nerve and VMaker for $10 says, importing migrants from the third world to let to your first world country because they will be more grateful for their opportunity is like a parent adopting children from the third world because they think their children don't praise them enough. It's a despicable tactic to cover up your failures. Yeah, this is always the problem, right? I mean, oh, immigrant, this is the whole boomer thing. You get this, oh, immigrants that we bring over here, they work a lot harder. We don't have to pay them as much. Well, what's going to happen? Are they going to be a permanent slave class? Oh no, of course they're not. They're going to be a client class, and you're going to have to import a new generation of workers to be a new slave class and repeat the whole process because you can't create a sustainable way of creating an economy where the people who are workers actually have dignity. Your children can't be dignified plumbers and carpenters because you've taught an entire generation of females that it's not a worthy proposition to be married to a carpenter or a plumber. So you continuously have to import people from the third world and promise them a standard of living that you can't possibly sustain because you've turned your entire country into an economic and cultural pyramid scheme. The only reason why there's prestige at your level is that you're importing a base of people who are paying the profits of the people that come in before them. And eventually it's going to come crashing down. It's not sustainable. I don't understand how boomers don't realize how this process works. I don't get it. I think that they just want someone else to solve it for them. And whoever has the magic academic sounding words who promises them that they can implement the Nordic model, socialism, just like the Nordic model. Whoever promises them that will get the endowments, will get the university positions, will get the funding donated to their magazines, just so we can keep this cope going and going and going and going and going. It's sad. I don't know what to say, and it's gonna create a generation of fake people, and it's literally the immigration is the Potemkin village of the boomers. The Nordic model is the Potemkin village of the Nordic model with mass migration is the Potemkin village of the boomers. It's just permanent enough to get them through their twilight years and to keep them writing checks to center-left publications so we can pretend like this whole thing is not fundamentally flawed at its inception. Pac-Man Respector for $10 USA. Options trads and cons have for fleeing to a modern country that still enforces sustainable culture, often not discussed, but seems like a realistic option for some to just flee the global American empire, if even possible in 2023. Seeing some try Poland, Russia, and Japan with limited success. I mean, okay. I don't know. What you're going to flee as a singleton to Russia or Poland? You're going to flee en masse to Poland? I mean, if you flee to Poland, you're going to make Poland more susceptible to the global American empire because you're going to decrease their cohesion by your very presence, because you'll force them to be a more multicultural place. Now, maybe, look, if you've got a good job opportunity in Russia, if you marry a Russian woman, I married a non-American woman, albeit, her parents can see America from their house, right? Quite literally. So, it's not like the biggest stretch, but still I'm married to non-American. I have ties to another country. But if you have an opportunity awaiting for you in another country and you can build a life for yourself in that other country where you make more money and you have a family that you wouldn't have in this country, then you can go for it. But fleeing to another country because it's better there because you're outside of the GAE is just a stupid idea for a lot of reasons. First of all, there is no country that's outside of the GAE. Second, your ability to operate in a foreign country where you don't speak the language or you don't have connections to the country is going to be much more limited as a general case than it is going to be in your home country. Second, you're going to have a hard time building networks. Third, by being there and not being of the native culture, you're going to make it harder for that native culture to assert itself if you universalize your action and people start doing it en masse. And the fifth, I always mention this thing when people mention fleeing. Whenever I think of fleeing, I think of my father and my grandfather, right? They lived in Eastern Europe as Germans, and they were fleeing away from the Red Army. Now, if my grandmother had fled preemptively from the Red Army to where she had most of her contacts in Hungary, she would have been fleeing into an area that was already occupied by the Red Army when it came time to flee from the Red Army. When crisis occurred for my father and for my grandmother in World War II, they did not get to pick the country they were fleeing to. They had to just flee away from where the problems were. So they had to flee into an entirely new area. And the thing that saved them, they probably could have survived just by being flat out refugees. But the thing that made the process much easier for them, and that there were a lot of people died. A lot of people died in that process. But what really saved them continuously was a set of familial networks that existed everywhere. So, my grandmother would have friends in Germany, friends in Austria, friends in Hungary. There were these networks that were built up. When a crisis hits, it could hit anywhere in the world. You don't know. And the most important thing you have is a network of friends and allies, such that, maybe you're not going to get royal treatment when you arrive in a place as a refugee. But you at least have a group of people that you know and will be operating in coordination rather than just being a de-atomized individual in some sort of holding pen with all the other atomized refugees that are coming in. The network is the most powerful thing in a moment of crisis. Other than that, there is no refugee. There's no reason to be a refugee in the current West. The only reason why you move is to increase your economic prospects. To prepare for a disaster, improve your network. Improve your wealth, improve your network, improve your skills. Do not preemptively flee from a disaster that hasn't happened yet into a country where a disaster hasn't happened yet. Because you could be fleeing into a country where the disaster happens. And because you flee to a place where you don't speak the language, and you don't have any contacts, and you don't have any jobs, and you don't have any family, you'll be fleeing into a place where you're more vulnerable. And so I highly advise against preemptively fleeing. So, thank you, Pac-Man Respecter, for $10. That's my take on that. Nerve AMV Maker for $3 USA. Now, I'll say this too. That utility of networks is why the basket weaving project is so important. It's so important to have a network of people. And we'll try to build this online too. I think the era of mass cancellation for the time being is over. So you can use social media to build up a Rolodex of people who you respect. It's important to make sure that they've got skin in the game, which is why it's always better to, build contacts with content creators rather than just sort of ship posters, because ship posters don't have skin in the game. But there's nothing better than in real life networking. And there's something more important than networking, which is why that needs to be the starting point for a reaction to looming crisis. And, I'm really losing my voice now. So, this is getting bad. Ooh. It's getting late too. Nerve AMV Maker for $3 USA. As a native Californian, what are your views on John Steinbeck? He's probably the greatest novelist from the state, but I don't think I have heard you talk about him. Well, isn't Jack London from California? Mark Twain also lived in California during a lot of his writings. Although, he's not from California. I'm trying to think of other Californian writers. There's probably a bunch that I'm not thinking of. It's not a great state for literature. But John Steinbeck's good. The Pearl of Mice and Men, Grapes of Wrath, Cannery Row, all great novels. I guess it never really... I never felt like the Salinas Valley in Monterey are really what I always associate with John Steinbeck. And now I've taken a lot of vacations down there. I'm not really from that area, but whenever I'm down there, I think of Mice and Men. But the problem with John Steinbeck, and this is a lot of the problem with California writers, and I know Blackhorse, my friend Blackhorse, was in California recently, and he was lamenting the fact that it doesn't feel like there's any there in California anymore. And that is because the world, the California that John Steinbeck describes, is very much archaeological. It is a California that I was just seeing the last part of disappear when I was a young child in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. And you can still, I mean, here's a good example of somebody who's very much of this culture, or, John Steinbeck, not John Steinbeck, oh God, what's the guy from the Heritage Foundation? Oh God, I'm blanking on his name. Victor Davis Hanson. That's it. Victor Davis Hanson. Like, he is a professor he's like an emeritus professor at Stanford. And he spends most of his time in his ranch up near, up in the hinterlands of the Central Valley, constantly complaining about the new immigrant populations that are kind of destroying the place. And I don't think the immigrants are particularly bad people. It just they're just not used to being in this location, and they're not the culture of the native South Californians. There used to be a whole type of Californian that lived in California and that lived close to the land, and that was of that particular place. And you can see it in Steinbeck. You can see it in Mice and Men. You can see it in Grapes of Wrath, and it's just gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. And it's not even gone in the way that the South is gone with the wind, with the famous Margaret Mitchell novel that was turned into an even more famous movie. The South is gone with the wind, the antebellum South. Well, the antebellum South is gone with the wind, but there's still like a very distinct impression of the antebellum South that still exists in the South. The California of John Steinbeck has been bit out of California. It's hard to even see the outline of that place anymore. You can still kind of see it in places like San Simeon and in some choice locations in various ranches. And obviously you can see it sort of embalmed in certain buildings in San Francisco. But there's no indication of the culture that was there. That has all been completely replaced by sort of shitlib Silicon Valley, Nancy Pelosi, we are the world culture that has no distinct place or feeling to it. And it's a tragedy. But that's always sort of been a barrier between me and John Steinbeck, is that it's simultaneously too close and too far away from me to really resonate with me. I do like San Simeon and trying to imagine what that California would have looked like. But I don't know. It's so hard to see. It's so hard to see, let alone live. I always say, what would it take? Could I get a bunch of old school Californians together and be like, oh, hey, boys, we're going to create our own town, like our Orania in California, where we're going to be like the people who used to live here in the early 20th century. We're going to be like this John Steinbeck Californians in like some kind of isolated community in California. I think there are sort of isolationist people in California, but to my knowledge, they're all kind of like the shitlib variety. I don't know. That would be. I don't think that would work. For some reason, it's too close to the epicenter of globalist power for those kind of projects to work properly. And maybe when the apparatus, I think the problem is actually too much money. The housing value is so high that any middle class person that wants to kind of be a racinated, cultured person, but not connected to some kind of Silicon Valley project or some kind of political project, they're all bought out. and new middle class people are all the land costs too much for them to be able to buy in. And so it eternally is just the stomping ground of corporations and of left-wing political projects and of client groups. And that's California. And the John Steinbeck California is well and truly left us. As much as I miss it, as much as I look at places like Monterey and Bodega Bay and wonder what it would be like when Hitchcock shot birds in Bodega Bay, famously, when you see Vertigo, one of my favorite movies, take place in San Francisco and Muir Woods and all those places. It's a tragedy. Again, I would love to find that place, but it doesn't exist. Ben White for $3 USA. Have you talked about Yoram Harzoni before? You probably have, but I can't remember between him and the other tribesmen. You've talked about him recently. Ben White, I've talked about Yoram Harzoni all the time. I really respect the man as a good man. But the problem with Yoram Harzoni, it's like he really has nothing to tell me as a Gentile. I'm sorry, right? He thinks that the issue with, noble people from that specific ethnic group, and they are very noble, and there have been many. Obviously, as a Christian, I know there have been many very noble, aristocratic souls from the house of David, so to speak. And those noble souls did not end with the new covenant. There continued to be many noble men of the house of David in present Judaism, and I know them. I deeply respect them. But we are at a time period where their instincts are not very good advice for us. I remember when Yoram Harzoni was on Alex Kashuda's podcast, and he's like, well, a lot of these online right-wingers, they just need to man up and go to church and reconnect with their ethnicity. And I'm thinking to myself, man, it must be great where you could just pop on down to your local church, and not only does that reconnect you with your religion, which you should, because you need a relationship with God to be a whole person, but that it also connects you to your ethnicity. This does not work for Gentiles. It might be able to if we work if we work very, very hard these next few decades. Maybe we can create communities where, in addition to connecting yourself to God, you also connect yourself to an ethnicity and a people. But these projects are separated fundamentally in the modern Christian world because of the fact that modern Christian congregations, if they're based, are still multicultural. So there's a problem there integrating a parish and having there's this Filipino side, and then there's this German side, and then there's this Polish side. And what are you doing? These are separate cultures. It's very difficult to just, and Yoram Harzoni says, well, even if you don't believe in God, this is something that actually Matt McManus takes Yoram Harzoni to task for, saying that this is fake when he says this. I don't think it's fake. Yoram Harzoni says, even if you don't believe in God, you need to connect to your heritage, and you can do that in a church. Well, Yoram, I do appreciate that you can do that in a synagogue. You cannot connect to your German heritage by going to a Catholic church in modern day America. You cannot do that. That will not be one of your experiences there. You can connect to your religious tradition, which you need to anyway, but you need to connect to whatever your ethnicity is through some other means that is not your church, because of the fact that, unlike modern, Judaism, modern Christianity is way, 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 way more multicultural. And because of that, it has many, many more barriers to it than does a religion like Judaism. For most Jewish people, multiculturalism is very, very hypothetical inside their own congregations. Okay, maybe there's a Sephardic Jew Like there's African Jews hypothetically, right? But for Catholic congregations, multiculturalism is a lived reality. At a very high percentage of your congregation is going to be different ethnicity, and not of different ethnicity like, oh, there's Russian Jews and there's German Jews. It's going to be different ethnicity in a much more substantial way. So Yoram Hazony has all of this advice about nationalism and about reconnecting with religion. That's totally inappropriate and ineffective for people who are not Jewish to follow. Moreover, he talks about what European nationalism would look like. But I don't see Yoram Hazony talking to people like Martin Sellner or Brittany Sellner. I don't see Yoram Hazony talking to people like Jared Taylor or Laura Towler. Why not? All Martin Sellner wants is what Yoram Hazony already has in Israel for his own ethnicity. And Martin Sellner is a good man. And I don't know those other people I mentioned, but I have spoken to Martin Sellner and Brittany Sellner, and I can say that they come off. They seem to me like they are devout Catholics and good people, and they're exactly the kind of people that Yoram Hazony says Gentiles should be. Devout religious believers and nationalists. But why does that conversation never occur? Well, it's because European nationalism is taboo, and Jewish nationalism, Zionism, isn't taboo in any similar sense. I mean, it's a little bit taboo in far left-wing circles, but the comparison is just not of the same thing, of the same variety, and so. The advice he has, we'll do mainstream conservatism, but do it with nationalism. Just pop on down to your church to get reacquainted with your own specific ethnicity and ethnic heritage. It doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. That's not good advice for other ethnicities. It's actually pretty bad advice. And I always think back to that Aesop's the entire thing. It reminds me of that Aesop's fable of the fox and the stork. The fox comes over to the stork's house, or the fox invites the stork over, and he puts the soup in a bowl, and the stork can't eat the soup. And the fox laughs at him. He pretends like he's being hospitable, right? But it's in a bowl. The stork can't get its neck down in order to get to the bowl. And then the stork, in revenge, has the fox over to her house, and she puts the soup in a giant urn, right? And the stork can easily eat the soup, and the fox can't have any. And that, I feel like that's all. I respect the stork. I respect the fox. I respect the stork as a fox. I can't eat soup in the way that you're delivering it to me, or I can't. We're not built that way. Our history isn't built that way. And if you want to support European nationalism or nationalism that looks like you for Gentiles, you're going to have to explain to me how we can have people like Brittany and Martin Sellner and not have them just depersoned by the apparatus of the global order that hunts them like witches and tries to destroy their family and ruin their careers for doing the same thing you're doing. And I don't know. He's a good guy, but he just doesn't get it. And I don't know. It's sad. It's sad that he doesn't need to get it. There's no incentive for him to get it. And then that's fine. And I'm sure that, he'll continue to be a good man. But, I'm here with this problem, and his advice doesn't fix it. Right? Some things will never be communicated across the chasm of culture. But that's just the sad state of reality. That's the sad state of being human, right? Sam153, is this it in the question bar? Yes. Evening Dave was listening to unpopular opinions today, and the Twitter algorithm was brought up. Not a big Twitter user at all, but it sounds like it's in disarray. Any thoughts on this? Obviously Elon's management of Twitter is off to a little bit of a bumpy start. but I don't really care because I want Twitter to go down. I mean, Twitter for me is the DMs, and the DMs are working. So if Twitter's algorithm is fucked and blowing up and on fire, that's an asset to me because I don't want this hell site to exist. If Twitter was to blow up under Elon Musk's rule, that would be a huge asset for me. I guess it would be sort of a victory for the cathedral because the most likely outcome of that would be that the oligarchy would be put back in control and they would reban us, and therefore Twitter would become useless as a Rolodex for me, which is mainly what I use it for. But the fact that the algorithm is screwed over, that doesn't affect me. That's good. I mean, who relies? I mean, I guess it's bad for Aaron McIntyre. You know, Aaron's an ally. He's my friend. He's a personal friend of mine. He's a great guy. He's a friend. I guess he might be technically for me since I never met him in real life. But we go way back to 2019. So it's relatively old in internet terms. He probably suffers from having the internet algorithm at Twitter screw up because his bread and butter is Twitter. But for me, Twitter is a distraction, a portal into hell, and it's only needed because I need it as a Rolodex. So I'm the wrong person to ask Sam153 because I don't have skin in the game. In fact, I have skin not in the game. Yeah, I hope Elon gets his shit together and gets this algorithm fixed so that people actually can get their stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he's being sabotaged by elements of the previous order there who want the whole thing to be a failure. But it's really not my job to make Twitter work. I don't care if it works, and I hope that, you know, as long as my enemies aren't using it, you know, I don't care. All I want Twitter to do is to not help progressives and for me to be able to message people, to organize things. That's all I need to do. Anyway, Darth Kilhoun for $3 USA. Hey Dave, I'm getting closer to publishing some of my novels. Right-wing propaganda implicitly. Well, you know, try to make novels not propaganda. Just stylistic advice there. Although I'm also enlisted Army, I'm wondering if it would be safe to publish under a pen name. Darth Gilhoun for $3 USA. I just know that they're hunting us down in the military, but I want to publish my art so we have some more art on the right wing while not being able to be discharged for being a subversive of the GAE ideology. Okay, Darth Gilhoun, first of all, use a pen name. Due diligence. Your art should be subtle enough so that you won't, if it's a novel, right? It should be subtle enough so that you have plausible deniability. This is an art, I mean, and really, if your right-wing novel is explicit enough so that a 85-year, probably more like a 90 IQ HR representative gets triggered by it, I think it's probably not subtle enough, right? Subtlety actually is effective. It's better to have your novel be ideologically subtle and nuanced. And the more ideologically subtle and nuanced it is, the less likely you are to get canceled for it. So think of these things as security layers. A pseudonym is one security layer. Subtlety in your novel is another security layer. Having a novel that makes humanized points that are beautiful and uplifting is in another security level. So each of these security levels provides you with different things that make it hard for it to impact your career. Also, you know, if it's a good novel, it's timeless, right? Most tours of duty in the Army only last for, you know, a few years, right? 5 years. So you could, recently, Pope Benedict XVI published his last memoirs posthumously. He wrote them years ago and made sure they came out after his death so they wouldn't cause drama in the church. Why not? If it's a novel, it should be able to last for 20 years at least. If you're worried, you could always publish it after you leave the service, unless you're a career. Which I don't know. I would be I would be thinking as a person looking for a career in this military, maybe that you want to have alternative options. I don't know. All of those things are like security levels, and no one security will give you safety. But if you use all of them, it should work, right? Use a pseudonym, make the novel subtle, don't make it explicit propaganda, make it uplifting so that there'll be defenders of your work that might want to pipe up for you and defend it as something that has like a good positive message. And then also, the final fail-safe is publish it after you get out of the service, and then you'll be sure that it won't come back and bite you. It's a novel. Novels should be permanent. These aren't like podcasts that have to go out to be relevant, and that's better for all concerned. Man, it's late, so I need to get going, but thank you, Darth Colhoun. I'm going to go on. Pronomian Chomsky. Pronomian Chomsky. Oh my God, that's the best name. Pronomian Chomsky. Okay, excellent name, and thank you. Very generous super chat. I can thank Matt McManus for red pilling me. Read him in Jacobin, Globo Homo Rag, years ago, talking about Edmund Burke and how basing ethical judgments on beauty was irrational and stupid. Looked up his picture and saw he never worked outside of academia. Sudden realization, hey, these people are losers. Why am I listening to them? Yeah. And I'm laughing as somebody who spent an embarrassingly long time working in academia. I'm one of those people who did like 2 years out, 2 years in, 2 years out, 2 years in. But luckily, I've had enough time working in corporate America and, one or two odd jobs in the mix there to have some foot in reality. But, isn't Matt McManus, he's like the perfect creation of academia. He has all of the right opinions, socialism, just like the Nordic model does it. That's the genuine opinion of Matt McManus. Asinine even by its own standards. It's great. But it does show you what modern academy does to people, because think of all of the interesting people you have talking in the distant right now that have a genuine curiosity. Would any of them get anywhere near academia? No. Academia is just a bunch of people who they prattle off a bunch of stale ideas. You're allowed to be a Damon Linker, maybe, in academia. Maybe. That's a big maybe. Damon Linker's idea is to be a professor in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where Matt McManus is a lecturer, which is a very good school. Actually, I'm alma mater there. Go Blue. So not to dox myself, but to be a professor in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with Damon Linker's attitudes, that would be a stretch. Ann Arbor was the home of a lot of Maoists back in the 60s. A lot of people who were really enamored of the Little Red Book. So there's probably some Maoists there. There are some Christian socialists, like McManus is I don't know. McManus is a Christian socialist. It's like the Holy Roman Empire being an empire. The Holy Roman Empire was not holy, not Roman, and not an empire. And McManus's liberal Christian socialism is not liberal, not socialism, and not Christian. But it has that name, and it's welcome there. And there's probably more Chomskyites, socialists of a different variety, leftist anarchists, and that's your Overton window. It's nothing. There's no controversy there. There's no curiosity there. It's all one thing. And and they're bored with questions over primary sources. Factual questions about history having to do with primary sources are boring for them. What's not boring for them is calling people names and calling them lazy. And coming up with new pretentious labels to put on your own variety of socialism, just like the Nordic model. McManus is kind of like everything I don't like about my own class. But since leftists think that class self-hatred is good and class consciousness is good, then they should like the fact that I hate my own academic class, right, Matt? I should hate my own class, which is your class. So as a class trader, let me indulge in some of the class self-hatred that your own ideology thinks is a good thing, and say that I have the contempt you'd like to encourage for what you represent. So a great name, Pronomian Chomsky. Look, the right wing does not have everything figured out at all. What we have is a bunch of principles that seem like they're eternal, a bunch of religious traditions that seem like they have genuine spiritual wisdom, and a problem of modern liberalism that is very, very apparently real. Now, to integrate all of these various truths is going to require another epoch, and who knows what's going to come out the other end. But I do know that the deep spiritual truth of Christianity is not going anywhere. I know that the iron law of oligarchy and Machiavellian power politics is not going to go anywhere. And I know that the nobility of monarchy that's described by many thinkers, most prominently people like Carlyle, but also much older thinkers like medieval thinkers like Dante Alighieri, and really any medieval thinker you'll get the idea of the nobility of monarchy. These ideas aren't going anywhere. And so whatever kind of garage band version we come up with right now that seems like it's working and that we're trying to get to work better, all we have is what our own degenerate age gives us. Hopefully new generations will come up with something that's even better than what we have now. But all we have right now is a list of ingredients, a hunger for truth, a desire for beauty, and a knowledge that something better can be created. And we also have an authenticity of humanity. We actually like human beings. We actually like real primary sources in real history. Our desires are directed towards real women and the creation of real families, and not sort of Lilithian simulacrum. I really want us to mainstream Lilithian simulacrum as the form of, that should be applied to all versions of anime women and pornographic AI-generated images. That needs to be something that's in our mind spiritually. Lilith as copy of Eve, a simulacra of Eve, paradoxically that exists before Eve in a really kind of Lovecraftian, horrific way, which I find really creepy. And who knows all that Hebrew apocrypha about Lilith? Obviously, Nephilim and stuff like that is literally biblical. But this comes from a tradition that is literally apocryphal. So take it with a grain of salt. But it is something that is good. I got Pronomian Chomsky. I got 2 donations here for the same super chat. So I hope you're not just. I hope you didn't gift me $60 to give me that one question. But I see it written 3 times here. If you ask me for a refund, I'll give it to you, because I don't want to charge you 3 times for that. I hope Entropy doesn't charge you 3 times for that. But thank you very much for the question. It was a good one. World War Free for $3 USA. I had to leave after your first response, but I found Twitter to be an amazing way for curious people to find different perspectives on breaking news and history. Lots of good info for discussing. Yes, but if you want to avoid the brain rot, you can just subscribe to Alex Kashuda's podcast or Jay Burden's podcast, because Jay Burden and Alex Kashuda, and also the Good Old Boys, Alex Kashuda, Jay Burden, and the Good Old Boys, They scour Twitter for the most interesting people, so you don't have to. So you don't have to put up with the mind virus and the mind rot that format encourages in people, and it really is terrible. Okay. Laviosaire for $5 USA. Hi Dave, I've recently had to move back to Sodom, the Bay Area. Work. Any suggestions for meeting people, activities, and churches? Well, the Bay Area had a few churches that were more based. There was one in San Francisco, and then there was one in the Berkeley East Bay Area, and there's certainly one in the South Bay. It's been a long time since I've been in the Bay Area properly, so I don't know. Wasn't there a Bay Area reactionaries group? There was back in the day when Molebug was there, and all I can say, Laviosaire, is our basket weaving project should have an entry for the Bay Area, and you can see if there's other areas, people there that would like to meet up. Conversely, I am periodically in the Bay Area-ish region, usually a little bit more inland, more Sac area, although I always come and visit friends up in the Bay Area. I would love, next time I'm in California, to host a meetup, a basket weave, in the East Bay, if you're there. Now it'll be like a one-day thing, and I'll probably leave on a plane the next day. But it might be a way to encourage more people in that area to actually meet up. And once you have the context there, it can become autonomous, right? Creeper Weirdo for $3. But thank you very much, Lavio. So I hope you find people. I've been stuck in the Bay Area, and the East Bay in particular, for more time than I care to admit, and it can be a little bit of a jungle. More so because the housing value is so high, and the commutes are so terrible. I remember just trying to get across the Bay Bridge. It used to be, it's like an hour now. It's every day, it's bumper to bumper traffic, and the BART is a mess. It's just an utter mess. And the city's only gets dirtier and dirtier and dirtier every time I go back. It's an American embarrassment at this stage. I feel embarrassed to be an American every time I think of the state of San Francisco. And it's such a beautiful location. And it's just a dump. It's a dump now. Creeper Weirdo for $3 USA. If you're interested in getting into Berserk, check out the unfortunately named Almighty Lolly. Well, okay. You already make me not want to check out this person that he's named Lolly. Short for Lolita, and you can imagine what lollies are in anime circles. He has a 21-hour video on the story straight from the manga. Be warned, though, he's kind of black-pilled. Well, really, I'll probably just buy the manga at some stage. I'm getting a new bookcase. I'm trying to read more. Once I'm done with the 3-body problem trilogy, I'll move on to something else that's fictional. And I'd love to have a manga to read. And I've been promising to read Berserk for ages now. And after Woman in the Dunes and 3-Body Problem, it would be good to have a comic book. And I'll definitely get to it before I get to Bionicles. As generous as that super chatter was, the medium of cartoons based on Legos, I'm sure it's very based, but it's suggesting that it might not be the most immediate priority. But yeah, it's good to have kind of some trash. Like, I read a Warhammer novel here and there, some stupid sci-fi novel from China. You shouldn't only be reading stuff like Thomas Hobbes and Yukio Mishima. You need to have a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, as they say. Burke Buck for $5 USA. Am I just slow, or has the Catholic Church always had an LGBTQ groups? Is this a Jesuit thing compounded by the fact that it's a Jesuit church in San Francisco? No, Catholic groups have not always had LGBT groups, and they shouldn't have LGBT groups. This is very much a Jesuit thing. and it's brought about by heretical elements inside the church. This is not something that should be encouraged in any moderate parish. If you see that your parish has an LGBT group, you might want to start looking for a new parish. I'm very tolerant of, a certain amount of boomer shit-libbery because I don't start political fights in parishes. But once there are explicit groups that promote something that is explicitly against the Catholic Catechism, you can be sure that there are virtually no people or leaders in that church that care about the Catholic Catechism. And you can also guarantee that the heretics in that church are better organized than the Orthodox. And you will immediately catch fire the second you step out of line on a cathedral mouthpiece issue. Jesuit parishes are I know there are some base Jesuit parishes. They're a order that has a very storied history in the church. They are in a terrible state right now. They're literally being led by heretical elements inside their own leadership, and I have nothing good to say about them right now. So I will cease saying anything. But yeah, this is a mess, and please, you probably want to think about looking for a new parish if you encounter that. Dreadnought for USA $5. A joke I made about another stream. Why has Canada started charging for the vax? Because they realized it's a competitor for MAID. Okay, that's a good one. Anyway, God bless you and yours, Dave. Well, thank you very much. The kid's just getting over an ear infection. And I'm very glad to hear that he hasn't woken up tonight, and that means he's getting better. So thank you very much, Dreadnought. I have a video in the works, but it kind of, I haven't finished editing it because of the fact that my time's been so constrained by people being sick, and of course people are always sick at this. It's always it kind of goes through the family, and if one family member is sick, all free time that is not explicitly scheduled immediately just disapparates. So there goes advanced content creation. Creeper Weirdo for $5. Can we get a shout out to Last Things? I've really been enjoying his work, though I disagree with his take on superheroes as a whole. I think they are a lesser reflection to a deeper thing, but still a reflection. Also, read and watch A Clockwork Orange. I read A Clockwork Orange in high school. It was pretty good. The Burgess's other novel, A Wanting Seed, was also pretty good, and I haven't read it in like 20 years, but I seem to remember it being kind of very, very, very reactionary. Last Things had a great The problem with Last Things is a great content creator. Everyone subscribed to him. He's a great guy too. Again, I'd like to say he's a personal friend, but I never met him in real life, so I'll say he's a personal friend for the time being. Like Aaron McIntyre, he had a great stream with Geo from Content Minded there a few days ago on Aaron McIntyre's channel, so everyone check that out. He had a his videos are really, really good, but his recent videos have all been on media that I never consumed. So I'm told he's going to do one on Sandman, and I'll promote the hell on that one when it comes out. But I've enjoyed his content enough so that I watch videos of his on content that I've never seen, and they're usually pretty good enough. Although his style is very, very deep divey, so I want to praise, as much as I want to praise him as a content creator, I will say that it is a little hard to watch if you haven't watched the thing that he's commenting on, and that's not really his fault. That's just a fault of the style of media he's producing. But great channel. Everyone check out Last Things. I'm going to go on because my voice is going to fail otherwise. Dreadnought, I re-listened to your reactionary horror essay since I'm on a horror kick at the moment. What are your 3 favorite horror movies and why? Okay, it's kind of unoriginal, but the Shining is obviously that's just a unique horror film. I don't know why it's so good. It's just really, really good. Other horror movies. I think that the original Psycho, does that count? I've always thought that was kind of delicious. Psycho and Vertigo. Like, I always felt that that Hitchcock's psychological thrillers were sort of peak horror, and I'm not so sure that there's ever been a better one. Another classic one that gets undermentioned are sort of the very, very early pre-code stuff like Freaks, which I felt was that movie just really creeped me out when I saw it. That I don't know if it's good. It's a 1930s pre-code movie about a circus performers that are played by real freaks. It has that very infamous scene where they're all saying one of us, gooble gobble. I could also move into that category of early films that are creepy because of what they are. Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, both of which are brilliant horror movies from the silent era that are just, they're creepy because they feel like they literally are artifacts that you're finding. They have like the medium itself has a creepy dimension to it that I really, really appreciate. So yeah, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the original Nosferatu. Silent movies generally have a very creepy dimension to them. Phantom of the Opera would be another one from the silent era. That's great. And then more modernly, I mean, I like The Witch, although that's just a spiritually difficult movie for me to watch. It seems sort of demonic in a way. And those modern horror movies, horror as a genre is the one it's the one genre that has not degenerated very quickly, just because our whole moment is haunted. We are the generation that will birth 1,000 ghosts, and we know it, and we know that we live in a demon haunted world, and because of that, horror is the one genre where our emotions can be sincerely expressed without cringe, without sort of the pause creeping in. So thank you, Dreadnought. I would give you a more considered answer if I have time to consider it, but sort of the Hitchcock ones, the early silent, and then sort of the sort of tableau horror of the Witch variety, of the Hereditary variety, really creeps me out, but does sort of seem sort of spiritual. It does seem sort of spiritually polluted, and so I feel I have a difficult time recommending it. Western Sun, thank God, the last one of the evening, and I'm just gonna read. Why not Psalm 1? That's nice and short. Western Sun for $10 to close out the evening. As a never married man in my late 30s, that window of opportunity is closing, as I have recently received a terminal diagnosis. Oh my God. I'm so sorry to hear that. What advice can you offer me on where to channel my energy? I have herefore directed it towards a goal that will likely never be realized. Oh my God, Western Sun, that's so... I feel very sorry. I apologize for that horrible news. I'll keep you in my prayers tonight. Okay, Western Sun. I would put your energy obviously into spirituality and to communing with higher powers, into your look, in our lives, our relationships are always going to be the primary things that we carry forward in our lives. And if you can kind of foster a relationship with God, foster a relationship with your family and with your current relationships, that is going to be the most valuable thing you can do with your life. If there is a third thing, and I guarantee you it's going to be an absolutely, after your relationship with your family and relationship with God, it'll be a very, very distant third thing. If you were to leave something behind, other than being, other than having a relationship with God and being a good family member, the thing we need most now is sort of honest perceptions of what it means to be human in the modern world. And I don't know if you're inclined towards creative pursuits at all, or short ones, right? But and I don't want to make light of your condition, but if you have a condition that's terminal, you are in a unique position of understanding life that none of us really are in. So much of our lives, so much of my life is like, my mind's constantly 10 years in the future. My mind's constantly thinking about what I should be doing, petty things. The greatest authors, the greatest works have been done in sort of the shadow of death. Flannery O'Connor, all of her work was done under the shadow of lupus, which eventually killed her at a very young age, at the age you're in right now. I'm not saying you're going to be a great artist, but you have, in addition to fostering the relationships you have with your family, you can communicate insight to other people about this very human moment we have in life, this authenticity, this non-fakeness in a totally fake world. And that I think is kind of that's a special thing that you can give that very few people in our culture are able to generate. But thank you, Western Sun. I apologize for terminating the super chat so quickly, but I do have to get to bed. So I'll thank everyone for joining us on this live stream tonight. I will always plug the basket weaving server, which should be found in the description. Probably first comment as well. Keep on basket weaving. Always keep in mind what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. Your relationships in life, in our all too short lives, and over the first and foremost your relationship with God. And here is Psalm number 1. Happy indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor lingers in the ways of sinners, nor sits in the company of scorners, but whose delight is the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. He is like a tree that is planted beside flowing waters, that yields its fruits in due seasons, and whose leaves shall never fade. And all that he does shall prosper. Not so are the wicked. Not so. For they are like a winnowed shaft, shall be driven away by the wind. When the wicked are judged, they shall not stand, nor find room among those who are just. For the Lord guards the way of the just, but the way of the wicked leads to doom. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me this night on Fiddler's Green podcast. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. Have cheers and blessings for the rest of your evening. Good night.